Chapter 1450. Yet, he had to face death at any moment every single day and struggle at death's door. That was why he hated her. But every time he could fall asleep with her in his arms, he almost didn't dare to admit that he actually felt moved. Her existence was his salvation. Love and hate, madness and gentleness coexisted. He poured all his feelings into her, and he couldn't afford to lose. Before he was tired of her, he didn't dare to let go. She was the first person he wanted to have. Bai Weiwei coldly sized him up a few times. Her eyes were calm, without hatred, let alone love. She was very rational, so rational that she was strong. Limited freedom. What kind of freedom? Gu Nanli's heart felt uncomfortable, and it was suffocating bit by bit. She was no different from doing business. She didn't even have a trace of emotion. Gu Nanli suddenly realized that she didn't hate him because she really didn't have any feelings for him. This realization made him immediately maintain his cold expression. He didn't want her to see his emotions change. You can go out, but you have to follow bodyguards. You can contact the Bai family, but you have to get my permission. You can continue your business, but the people you use and the resources you won't have to go through my hands. It wasn't freedom at all. It was like a cage. The golden cage of Golden Canary was just like that. Gu Nanli saw that her expression had turned cold, and she seemed to be very dissatisfied. He finally couldn't suppress the uncomfortable feeling in his heart. You should be satisfied. If you don't accept it, I'll really build a cage and lock you in. Weiwei Bai immediately pursed her lips and suppressed her dissatisfaction. But her calm and cold eyes finally showed an expression of irritation. Gu Nanli looked at her for a while and didn't say anything. The servant outside the door politely knocked on the door. It seemed that she was here to deliver the medicine. Gu Nanli was silent for a few seconds before letting go of her wrist and lying back on the bed. The servant took the tray and carefully handed the medicine bowl to Gu Nanli. "Mr. Gu, drink it while it's hot." Gu Nanli waved his hand and dismissed the servant. Then, he calmly drank the medicine. It was extremely bitter, but it didn't make him frown. Although Gu Nanli had been sleeping most of the time these days, he would occasionally wake up and see that Weiwei Bai hated these traditional Chinese medicines. Even if he had to drink it, he had to have a bunch of sweet things to suppress the root of his tongue. She was afraid of hardship, just like a child. When Gu Nanli thought of this, he couldn't help but laugh. Weiwei Bai looked at him as if she was looking an idiot. He smiled and said, "Come here for a moment. I thought of something very funny." Weiwei Bai's face was cold and indifferent. Gu Nanli repeated, "Come here." His tone was heavy, and an icy pressure appeared. Weiwei Bai paused, and then reluctantly walked to the bedside. However, Gu Nanli drank the last mouthful of medicine. It was the most bitter mouthful, and most people wouldn't drink it. After he put it in his mouth, he quickly pulled her into his arms and held the back of her neck. He lowered his head and kissed her. He poured this mouthful of medicine into her mouth. Weiwei Bai froze, and her face turned ugly. She looked disgusted and tried to push Gu Nanli away with all her might. However, he maliciously pressed down on her lips and stirred her mouth, forcing her to swallow all the medicine. It was one of the top 10 tortures. Weiwei Bai felt that her tongue was about to explode. The taste of the medicine was so bad that it could make people commit suicide. Gu Nanli's mouth was full of bitterness, but he didn't feel anything. However, she was about to suffocate. No one would feed medicine like this. This was murder. Gu Nanli let go of her and then took a sweet from the plate beside the table and stuffed it into his mouth. Such a sweet thing wasn't as tasty as Chinese medicine. However, Weiwei Bai liked it because she also drank his medicine. Every time, she needed candy to drink it with a bitter face. How could a person who wasn't afraid of a rain of bullets be so embarrassed by a bowl of medicine? It was so cute. Weiwei Bai was held in his arms and couldn't break free. Her mouth was full of bitterness. She frowned. Gu Nanli. Gu Nanli lowered his head and kissed her. There was the bitterness of the medicine in his mouth, but more of it was the sweetness. Weiwei Bai couldn't help but take the initiative to suck, as if she was taking the initiative to ask for a kiss. Gu Nanli chuckled. His mood was much better. A lot. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 1451. CCE brought a pile of documents for Gu Nanli to deal with. He said, "It hasn't been very peaceful here recently. Take some effort to deal with it yourself. I'm going back to China." Gu Nanli said indifferently, "Remember to leave half of your men behind." CCE said, "That's right. You do need to be careful recently. Many people want your life." Gu Nanli stopped writing and looked up coldly. "It's not for me." CCE immediately understood. "Oh, for your little bird." Gu Nanli threw the pen in his hand at him fiercely, almost throwing a chair. CCE raised his hands in surrender. "Okay, I won't talk about her anymore. I also understand that you've never had a woman before, so you became an excited little boy when you fell in love for the first time." Gu Nanli took another pen. "She hasn't been very happy recently." He had no choice. It wasn't appropriate to discuss this kind of thing with anyone. CCE had changed a lot of women, and all of them loved him to death. So Gu Nanli put down his pride and reluctantly asked him. CCE said, "What is she like? Just give it to her." Gu Nanli paused for a moment before saying, "She wants freedom." CCE touched his chin helplessly. "Why don't you let her go first, and then go after her obediently? Otherwise, you can't lock her up for the rest of her life." Gu Nanli said calmly, "I can." CCE, Gu Nanli repeated, "With my current strength, I can lock her up for the rest of her life." Now that the forces that had offended him in the underworld were almost eradicated, he was the real power now, and he was even more glorious than Bai Qi. Those dark businesses that made money in the underworld were also in his hands. As long as the assassination didn't succeed, it was almost impossible to defeat him. As for Wei Wei Bai, her hands and feet were completely bound by him. Unless she could escape overseas to develop her power, there was no possibility for her to develop her own business in his territory. Unless he gave up his authority. CCE spread out his hands. "All right, bro, I don't want to nag you, but love can't be created by being locked up. You have to have confidence in yourself. Look at you. You're handsome and rich. Other than being a bit of a loner, you don't have any other faults. If you let go and chase after her, you'll definitely be able to catch up. Then, you won't have to worry about her running away. She'll definitely fall in love with you." Gu Nanli was stunned. "Fall in love with me?" There was a rare hint of hesitation in his tone. "What if she still doesn't love me?" CCE laughed. "How is that possible? You're a good man. There aren't many men as good as you these days. Women are all snobbish. They like you when they see you." He had never seen a woman who didn't love a man who was rich, handsome, and clean. Gu Nanli was practically a prince who walked out of a high-quality idol drama. Of course, this prince had a dark background and wasn't very good at pleasing women. Gu Nanli was silent for a long time before frowning slightly. "What, there's a 1% chance that I'm not the type she likes? What should I do?" CCE, let's part on good terms. Feelings can't be forced. If you love her, give her your blessings, bro. Gu Nanli was stunned for a while before saying, "Then I'd better lock her up." CCE's smile froze. Question mark. Gu Nanli lowered his head indifferently and continued to sign. "At least I'll get her body 100%. If I have to let her go for her heart, I won't get anything in the end if she runs away. Such a loss-making business." He wouldn't do that. / You'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like the... Chapter 1452. Even if he locked her up, at least she was still his. What he cared about was practical benefits, not the illusory future. CCE hesitated for a moment. "If you lock her up for too long, aren't you afraid that she'll turn against you?" Gu Nanli said, "It's okay. She hates me enough now." CCE, looking at Gu Nanli, who was extremely calm and even took it for granted, CCE said helplessly, "Okay, as long as you're happy. But I need to sort out my people and pick out some people who can't be used before I can give them to you." His brother's spies were mixed in with his people. He and Gu Nanli knew about these spies. If they were to give people to Gu Nanli, then there wouldn't be a problem. Giving people to Wei Wei Bai wouldn't work. He could only use his most loyal people. After all, in addition to protecting Wei Wei Bai, they were also her jailers. Gu Nanli took care of things and walked into the living room. He stopped in his tracks and saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the sofa lazily looking at the nail polish bottles. She looked lazy and her eyes were blurred with a hint of tiredness. She hid her willful side. After being locked up, she stayed obediently, but she didn't have the energy to patronize him. Gu Nanli stared at the slightly exposed shoulder blades on her back. They were fair and delicate. Her beautiful neck was flawless. Her short hair was a little longer and covered half of her neck. She was like a lazy and noble big cat, neither cold nor warm when she saw him. She dared to neglect him because she knew that he would keep his promise not to touch her family. Gu Nanli thought that if he couldn't stand her coldness one day and threatened her with the things she cared about, would she pretend to be more friendly to him? She probably would. She had always been cunning and didn't care much about her face. Gu Nanli was just thinking about it and didn't intend to do it. Wei Wei Bai seemed to notice him and turned to look at him. Then she averted her gaze and rested her chin on her hand as she counted the nail polish bottles. Gu Nanli slowly walked to her side and sat down. He reached out and touched her back. She was wearing a thin, low-neck dress. Separated by a layer of fine fabric, his rough and calloused fingers rubbed against her body, almost as if he was touching her skin. Do you want to go out for a walk? If she could pull herself together, he would go with her. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, no need. Gu Nanli, do you want to go to work? Wei Wei Bai looked indifferent. Working for you? Not going. Gu Nanli hesitated for a moment. Are you going home? Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before looking up at him lazily. Sure. Gu Nanli pursed his lips and tried to bargain. You have to do something to make me happy before I can let you get what you want. Weren't all other people's mistresses like this? Actually, he didn't really see her as a plaything. He wouldn't let others call her mistress in front of her, but he didn't know where to place her. He just didn't want to let go, and he hoped that she would take the initiative to get close to him. Wei Wei Bai heard his words and sneered. Why? How do you want to be happy? Do you want to have weak kidneys again? His body hadn't recovered for a few days, and his brain was already full of dirty thoughts. Gu Nanli immediately said, I won't force you if you don't want to. Go back if you want to. Come back before dinner. Wei Wei Bai got up. She took the coat by the sofa and planned to go back to take a look. But just as she sat up, Gu Nanli suddenly reached out and held her delicate ankle. Slash. Chapter 1453. Wei Wei Bai tried to move, but found that he was holding on tightly like a shackle. Master Gu, if you don't want me to leave, just say it. You don't have to be so fake. Gu Nanli lowered his eyes, but did not let go of her foot. Instead, he took a bottle of nail polish from the sofa with one hand. What color do you want? Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. I thought you didn't like this? Gu Nanli was silent for a few seconds, then said, but you like it. Other than freedom, he would try to give her everything she liked. Wei Wei Bai shook her foot and said with a frown, forget it, there's no need. Gu Nanli let go of her foot and opened the nail polish bottle. It was bright red. The color was beautiful, and her feet were even more beautiful. Gu Nanli did not care how lowly he looked when he squatted down. He calmly took the nail polish bottle and used a small brush to apply the red nail polish on her toes. Her natural nail color was the most beautiful, but she liked these, so he tried to lower his status and not stop her. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, as if she could not understand what he was doing. After Gu Nanli finished applying the nail polish, he looked at the color that was not dry. He thought for a moment, then lowered his head and blew on it. Wei Wei Bai trembled and retracted her foot. He was not angry, but only looked down and said calmly, when you go back today, you can bring some things back. Bring whatever you like. He would give her the people around him. CCE's people would only arrive the day after tomorrow. Wei Wei Bai looked at him speechlessly for a moment, then suddenly reached out and grabbed his collar, pulling him down. Then she raised her head and kissed him on the lips. The warm breath intertwined, and the man's breathing became heavy. Before he could react, Wei Wei Bai had already let go of him. She then smiled and said, this is for you, little husky. I painted my nails. Help me put on my shoes. Gu Nanli hesitated for a moment, only to see her half leaning on the sofa. Her eyes, which had been indifferent for many days, had a hint of joy. She finally felt a little happier. By the time he regained his senses, he had already helped her put on her shoes. There was not even a trace of shame in his heart. When his fingers touched her ankles and insteps, there was even a trace of uncontrollable morbid greed in his heart. He helped her put on her shoes. Gu Nanli suddenly raised his head and looked at her intently. Wei Wei Bai didn't react for a moment. She wanted to get up and leave, but he grabbed her ankle and didn't let go. He continued to look at her. She was at a loss for a moment. Then, she saw a strange grievance in his eyes. The corners of Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She resisted the chill and lowered her head to kiss his lips. Gu Nanli was satisfied. He released her. Go early and come back early. His voice became gentle. Wei Wei Bai trembled. This man's gentleness was simply abnormal. Then she heard the notification sound of the affection level. Ding! The male lead's affection has increased to 60. This affection level rose like it was abnormal. Wei Wei Bai returned to the Bai family, with a large group of bodyguards following behind her. They were all strong and had weapons in their pockets. They were wearing black suits and sunglasses, as if they were afraid that others wouldn't know that they were up to no good. Wei Wei Bai walked into the Bai family with an expressionless face. The Bai family was still the same as before. Gu Nanli's massacre made the entire underworld not dare to make a sound. Even if there were all kinds of revenge assassinations in the dark for the current Gu Nanli, he had already become the true overlord of the underworld. These were just small matters. Chapter 1454. Wei Wei Bai's Bai family was imprisoned because of her. She immediately became a toy in Gu Nanli's hands. His people began to infiltrate her business. They slowly grasped her business in their hands. These were still hers, but it had to go through his hands. Actually, it was still his. How could she have a say in it? Gu Nanli was determined to raise a bird, not to let it fly. This man had no sense of security. He didn't even believe that with his incomparable good looks, huge wealth, ruthless and cool methods, there would be women who would love him. It was too late for Bai Weiwei to pretend to love him like a little white flower. The character set in the beginning prevented her from becoming a retard and a sucker to warm Gu Nanli's heart. And she had almost destroyed him once. Gu Nanli was very guarded against her now. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "It seems that the strategy is a lifetime. Can't you allow me to rest?" There had never been a plane where the pace of the strategy was so sluggish because of the target. Gu Nanli's heart was too hard to open. And because of the side mission, she didn't have any information about Gu Nanli's childhood in her data. She couldn't figure out where his terrifying heart came from. There was surprisingly little information about Gu Nanli in this world. The system didn't say anything. It wasn't easy for her to guess alone with a bitter face. Wei Wei Bai arrived at the Bai family and saw Bai Mu standing at the door with a bitter face, holding the dog and looking at her. Mississippi, he saw the person behind her, and his expression became fierce. Wei Wei Bai looked at him indifferently. "I'm here to pack up. You continue to manage the company. I'll come back when I'm free." Bai Mu wanted to say something, but stopped. Seeing so many people, he didn't dare to say anything. Wei Wei Bai sat on the sofa and said to the person behind her, "Go and pack up my things. If you want to move them quickly." She was bossy, and her actions were natural, as if it was natural for her to command others to serve her. Bai Mu carried the dog and carefully came to her side. He even asked the servant to bring some warm tea. Wei Wei Bai sipped her tea. "Nothing will happen at home. After I leave, I'll appease the subordinates and the elders of the Bai family. Let them continue with their work in peace." Bai Mu said, "Miss, are you going to be trapped by Gu Nanli like this for the rest of your life?" Wei Wei Bai sneered. "What else? You want to become Superman to save me? It's not enough to save me. Do you think so many people at home can escape with me? Furthermore, if he ran away, how would he be able to capture Gu Nanli? What a difficult little demoness." She gnawed at him until her teeth ached. His kidneys were already weak, but he still dared to act like he was not satisfied. He had only recovered a little in the past few days, and now he was kissing and touching again. Now, almost everyone knew that she had an affair with Gu Nanli, and it was Gu Nanli who deliberately did it for others to see. He even made it clear that in the future, they did not need to send gifts to curry favor with him. It was enough to curry favor with Wei Wei Bai, who wasn't a shrewd person. Wei Wei Bai suddenly became a hot new star in the underworld. Gu Nanli wanted her to be labeled as his woman wherever she went. Scheming bitch. Wei Wei Bai drank her tea with a cold face. Such a lukewarm approach was not her style. She couldn't wait to reach 100 points, kick Gu Nanli away, and have fun by herself. When Bai Mu heard Wei Wei Bai's disdainful words, he was silent for a moment before saying, "I'm sorry, Mississippi." Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that something was wrong. She immediately looked up at him, but her vision turned black and her head was dizzy. / crossover system. Adonis, come over here. Chapter 1455. Tongzi. The system did not warn her that there was something wrong with the tea. The system said, "Don't worry, I'll watch over you." Bai Mu was one of the characters in the side mission, so he could not warn Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai trusted him. Okay. Then she fell onto the sofa, the teacup in her hand falling to the ground. Bai Mu stood at the side and watched as she fainted. His expression contorted. Then, before anyone could react, he threw a punch. A group of people broke through the door. It was the police. Bai Mu's expression became cold and stern. Arrest them all. The system looked at Bai Mu's information and opened it. Damn, this guy was a spy in the Bai family. He had been in hiding for 8 years. Bai Qi trusted him so much because he was the illegitimate son of Bai Qi who had an accidental one-night stand with a girl when he was young. The system had a "what the hell is this" look on its face. So this was what happened back then. Gu Nanli was Bai Qi's child. He was swapped by Gu Buddha, then tortured and abused in the Gu family, causing him to be indifferent to family and hate family. Bai Mu was Bai Qi's illegitimate son. He was adopted when he was wandering outside, then became a spy and returned to Bai Qi's side, planning to arrest his father and put him in prison. Gu Nanli and Bai Mu were biological brothers. What was even more ridiculous was that Bai Mu was older than Gu Nanli by a few years. Bai Mu was Gu Nanli's brother. The side mission could be so ridiculous and complicated. And Bai Qi's death was also a headshot by Bai Mu. The system, this father had tricked him, and now he was dead. How much hatred did he have? Wasn't this complicated and strange family side mission tricking its host? Who would have guessed? Wei Wei Bai had a splitting headache. When she woke up, she saw a strange yet familiar man standing beside her. When he saw that she had woken up, he immediately held her face and gave her a few sips of warm water. "Are you feeling better?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, as if she did not know him. The man fed her some water and looked at her silently for a while before saying, "I'm Bai Mu." Wei Wei Bai looked at his handsome face and finally couldn't hold it in anymore. "Did you go for plastic surgery?" After saying that, she saw his face contort and immediately added, "You did a good job. You look pretty good." Bai Mu's expression twisted even more. "I've always looked like this." It was only because of the special makeup that his face became inconspicuous. The confusion in Wei Wei Bai's eyes gradually dissipated. Her eyes regained their coldness. "Who are you?" Bai Mu was silent for a few seconds before he awkwardly looked away. "I'm your older brother." Wei Wei Bai, the system added, "He's actually Gu Nanli's older brother, but Bai Mu doesn't know that you've been switched." Bai Mu had always known that Bai Qi was his father. Wei Wei Bai was his sister. As for Gu Nanli, he was the big bad guy who should be caught. Wei Wei Bai thought of the side mission. The mystery of Gu Nanli's birth couldn't be that she had to investigate how many family members he had, right? So Bai Mu was also included in the side mission. He was the one who caught her, so the system did not remind her in advance. Wei Wei Bai muttered to herself, "Older brother?" Bai Mu's face reddened, and he awkwardly looked away. He clenched his fingers and said, "The Bai family has been arrested for being involved in the smuggling case. You're now one of the suspects and need to be interrogated. I've already applied for special witness protection for you, so you won't be treated too badly." Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned cold. "Special witness?" Bai Mu looked at her blankly before saying, "Accuse Gu Nanli and provide evidence of his crimes. You definitely know what he's doing." Say button at the bottom to record this reading. You'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like crossover system, Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 1456. Gu Nanli was like an impenetrable fortress. There was no weakness to be exploited. Finally, Wei Wei Bai appeared. Everyone was using her as a breakthrough point. Bai Mu had exposed his identity in advance so that he could take her away from that dark world. Then, she would be rewarded for capturing Gu Nanli and atoning for her crimes. Moreover, Wei Wei Bai was locked up by Gu Nanli. She must hate him to death. Bai Mu thought of the occasional ambiguous marks on her neck and arms, and his eyes became angry. She would definitely accuse Gu Nanli. I refuse. Bai Mu was confused. What? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold, and she repeated softly, I refuse. After that, she took the glass on the table and smashed it on Bai Mu's head. Blood immediately gushed out from his head. Wei Wei Bai immediately rushed out. The door opened, but she couldn't escape. A group of people were guarding outside the door, looking at her coldly. Wei Wei Bai leaned against the door and sighed regretfully. Then, she turned to look at Bai Mu. Bai Mu's head was covered in blood. Glass shards stuck to his hair. At this moment, he looked like a demon. Finally, he couldn't help but ask in a trembling voice, You fell in love with Gu Nanli? Wei Wei Bai was silent for half a second. Finally, she couldn't help but laugh. She seemed to think that he was joking. Who likes that silly husky? He's so insensitive and straight. Bai Mu's eyes were sharp. Then why aren't you a witness? Wei Wei Bai sneered. Because I'm his first woman. Bai Mu, Wei Wei Bai kindly explained, I can't help it. It's his first time. Although I don't want to take responsibility, I can't let him rot in jail. You know, the first time is always very important. Bai Mu, I don't understand the perverted world. Don't explain. He held back his anger and reached for a tissue to press on the wound on his forehead. Then, he walked over to Wei Wei Bai and suddenly reached out to hold her down. Wei Wei, I'm not joking with you. You're suspect now. If you don't accuse Gu Nanli, you'll be in danger. Wei Wei Bai felt a sharp pain in her wrist. She endured the pain and said, Where did you come from? Bai Mu is not like you. He won't harm me. Bai Mu's fingers trembled. Wei Wei Bai coldly said, My father told me that Bai Mu would never hurt me, and he would never betray me. Bai Mu's face paled. He had no feelings for the Bai clan or Bai Qi, only towards her, suppressing the unspeakable feelings in his heart. His expression turned cold. Tell me everything about Gu Nanli. This is very important. Wei Wei Bai said, His posture in bed is not good. He only does the same few things, and his kidney is weak. His body is not good. Bai Mu, just as Wei Wei Bai was talking nonsense with Bai Mu, Gu Nanli sat on the chair without saying a word. His face was snow white, his eyes were extremely dark, and his hair was covering his eyes. There was an extremely cold and noble air about him. Everyone looked at him, trembling. There was a long silence. This extremely oppressive atmosphere was almost driving everyone crazy. Gu Nanli finally spoke. Cici, go back to China first. Cici, who was at the side, was holding a poker card in his hand and counting in boredom. What are you going to do? You're not really going to go up against those guys, are you? Their biggest taboo was the security guards of the white-faced world. Bai Mu's status in the white-faced world was very high. The power that was involved was not something that those small squabbles in the past could compare to. Wei Wei Bai had been taken away. If they wanted to snatch her back, it would be a matter of life and death. // Chapter 1457. Gu Nanli got up and put on his jacket expressionlessly. Wei Wei will betray me. She knows too many things about me. She won't let go of this opportunity to defeat me. Cici dropped a few cards in his hand. How can you be so sure that your little bird will betray you? Gu Nanli said calmly. It's not the first time anyway. She will only be happy if I die. Of course, she would be happy if no one imprisoned her. Cici asked, Then what are you going to do? Gu Nanli pursed his thin lips, his expression cold and gloomy. I'm going to save her at all costs. Cici immediately advised, Calm down. You have to think about this at length. Gu Nanli's gaze was like a knife in the dark, cold, and ruthless. I can't wait. She hasn't seen many things yet. If I'm late, she will be afraid. That place was the graveyard of the underworld. She had never been caught before. She would be afraid. The cards in Cici's hand finally fell to the ground. He said seriously, Gu, you don't like her. This is love. For a man to sacrifice so much for a woman, it was no longer in the category of love. Cece liked so many women, but he didn't love any of them. There was a limit to how much he liked. If he had to sacrifice too much, he would give up. But if it was love, then he would share life and death with her. With Gun Namli's attitude, it was impossible that he liked her. Gun Namli was expressionless, his black eyes fixed on Cece. After a moment of silence, he said, "What did you call her just now?" Cece's face was full of question marks. What did he say just now? Without waiting for Cece to understand, he punched him, making him see stars and his ears ring. "I told you not to call me Little Bird anymore. Even if you want to call me that, it should be me." Gun Namli punched Cece and said calmly, "Don't worry." Cece covered his face with his hand and shouted angrily, "You're a pervert, right? How can you hit someone because of a name? You love her, right?" Gun Namli was already irritated, so he raised his hand and knocked him out with another punch. Very good. The world was quiet. Gun Namli tidied up his clothes. His fingers were pale and trembling. He didn't know if she loved him or not. In any case, he felt that she should stay by his side and not go anywhere. The strong light made by Wei Wei squint her eyes somewhat uncomfortably. Her skin was white to begin with. Coupled with the fact that she hadn't had enough rest during this period of time, this white color became unhealthy and fragile, as if it would disappear in the next second. Bai Mu looked at her coldly, his fingers digging into the flesh of his palm. Another interrogator beside him said coldly, "How long have you been with Gun Namli? Have you guys worked together before? Have you killed anyone? What's the smuggling route? How many accomplices do you have?" A series of questions were asked repeatedly. They had been forcing her to answer like this for the past few days. Wei Wei Bai smiled tiredly. "I don't know. What are you talking about? I'm doing a legitimate job. As for Gun Namli, we're just a one-night stand, all right? Even though we've had more than one-night stands, I only know his name. How would I know anything else?" She wasn't allowed to sleep or eat. She was only given some water when she couldn't hold on any longer. Ever since she rejected Bai Mu's request to betray Gun Namli, Bai Mu seemed to have given up all hope as she was brought up to this point for interrogation. Bai Mu, on the other hand, did not utter a single word. From the beginning to the end, he coldly watched the interrogator interrogate her. Say button at the bottom to record this reading. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf, if you like. Chapter 1458. Unless the interrogators wanted to do something to her. Otherwise, Bai Mu wouldn't have stopped them. And even though Wei Wei Bai was forced to such a weak and painful state, she didn't reveal a single bit of information about Gun Namli. Even a man would break down in less than half a day. She had already held on for 4 days. This kind of perseverance was simply unimaginable. Even the interrogators were impatient and under great psychological pressure. They had never seen such a difficult bone to chew. Just as Wei Wei Bai said that she didn't know again, Bai Mu suddenly walked over and smashed the strong light on the ground. His expression was furious as he grabbed her wrist tightly. Looking at her face that was so weak that it was about to break down, he gritted his teeth and said, "Why don't you talk? You'll die." With such devastation, not only her mind, but her body couldn't take it either. If she kept refusing to talk, she would go crazy if the interrogation continued. Wei Wei Bai looked up lazily, her eyes bloodshot. She laughed coldly. "What are you talking about, brother? I don't know anything other than sleeping with him. And I think he's quite good. He's cute and pitiful. He doesn't even dare to sleep alone. This kind of man is definitely timid and won't do bad things." Fuck you, won't do bad things. Gun Namli had already become a big boss in the underworld. Won't do bad things? Did he become the head of the arms industry by persuading others to do good? Bai Mu said word by word. "You just like him, don't you?" This tone didn't sound like a sibling's. It sounded more like catching an adulterer. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely, as if she felt that he was abnormally agitated. Bai Mu avoided her gaze awkwardly, then let go of her hand and said fiercely, "Continue the interrogation." After saying that, he was afraid that he would soften and leave immediately. After leaving, he took out a cigarette and lit it, then lowered his head dispiritedly. It was different from what he had expected. It was all different. He thought that she would be a witness and hate Gu Namli. He had already found a way for her. As long as she destroyed Gu Namli, she would be the biggest contributor. She can be acquitted. Then, he was her brother. Since the Bai family had been captured, he was the only one she could rely on. She could only live with him. A dark thought appeared in his mind. Bai Mu's fingers trembled. His breathing grew heavier as he warned himself. They were blood-related siblings. Even if they had never lived together, they were still related by blood. Suddenly, the door opened and the person inside said anxiously, "The suspect has fainted. Send him to the hospital." Bai Mu's vision went black, and the cigarette in his hand fell to the ground. He hurriedly rushed in, only to see Wei Wei Bai lying on the table silently. Her face was frighteningly pale, and there was a terrible aura of death under her eyes, as if she would die at any time. He immediately picked her up and rushed out. On the way to the hospital, in the ambulance, Bai Muchuan received a call from the station. Someone on Gu Namli's side leaked information. It's a document of Gu Namli's crimes. It's very detailed. We can arrest him now. Bai Mu's breathing paused. Who leaked the secret? I can't say. Sorry, this is a great merit. You could take the arrest warrant and arrest him now. If Bai Mu went to arrest him, it would be a greater merit than Bai Qi. Bai Mu looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was lying on the stretcher. She had lost a lot of weight in the past few days, and her face was pale. She had suffered so much that her mental state was on the verge of collapse. He gripped his phone tightly and suddenly said, "I won't go. But when you arrest him, say that the person who leaked the secret is Wei Wei Bai." She would completely turn against Gu Namli. She would cut off all ties with that dark world. After Bai Mu hung up the phone, he looked at Wei Wei Bai in a daze for a while. Suddenly, he tried to reach out and touch her slender fingertips. That delicate touch caused his fingers to tremble for a while. He finally held her hand tightly and refused to let go. Comma. Chapter 1459. Gu Namli sat in the car. He had just received news that Wei Wei Bai had been sent to the hospital. What hospital had been kept a secret? This was not a problem for him. He began to investigate the number of people sent to the hospital today. As long as there was a hospital admission record, he could find it. After checking everywhere, he could not find any records. Wei Wei Bai's admission record had been hidden. Gu Namli only said coldly, "Continue to investigate. Also check the number of times the ambulance went out." Just as he was investigating, Cici called. "Gu, I've called for a private jet. You have to leave with me tonight. Wei Wei Bai really betrayed you and leaked everything about you." Cici looked very busy. "That's strange. Aren't you very guarded against her? How did she find out?" Gu Namli was silent for a moment before saying, "I've put all the information in a place where she can reach." "Cici, what the hell?" "Gu Namli, I want to see if she will really betray me a second time." Cici almost hit the wall. "You've become stupid from being in love." "No, you're not in love. You're taking her by force. You know that she hates you, yet you still do such a stupid thing?" Gu Namli said indifferently. "Oh." "Cici, hold your head. Hurry up and get on the plane with me. Let's go abroad to hide. You have a strong foundation. It's easy for you to return to your peak, but you have to get through this." Gu Namli, "I want to take her away." Cici was about to kneel down. People in love were indeed stupid. They were all fools. How could he work with a fool? This was his grand plan. Cici wanted to say something, but Gu Namli had already hung up. His subordinate said that the investigation had reached the hospital. Gu Namli took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart before saying, "Save her." He took out his gun. The veins on the back of his hand were bulging. His calm expression finally collapsed. Hospital? What happened to her? Did they hit her? How heavy? Was it life-threatening? Gu Namli's calm mind went crazy. He actually started to feel afraid. This fear was not the same as when he was young, nor was it the fear of falling into a nightmare. Instead, it was mixed with the fury of wanting to destroy everything if anything happened to her. Wei Wei Bai was put on an intravenous drip and injected with a nutrition injection. She struggled to regain consciousness. In fact, the system had given her a lot of sobriety potions. She didn't feel uncomfortable, but her body's weakness didn't decrease. Therefore, his body still looked like it was in great pain. Wei Wei Bai complained to the system. So Gu Nanli has an older brother, Bai Mu. Bai Mu is Bai Qi's illegitimate son. Bai Mu hates Bai Qi, so he went undercover for many years and finally got rid of Bai Qi. Now, Bai Mu plans to get rid of Gu Nanli. Bai Mu was practically a boss. Bai Mu was related to Gu Nanli's family background. As a result, when he was undercover, the system could not tell her. Wei Wei Bai felt that the side mission must be very complicated. Bai Qi couldn't have hundreds of illegitimate children outside, right? If she had to find all those illegitimate children to complete the side mission, wouldn't she be unable to complete it for the rest of her life? Wei Wei Bai's head hurt when she thought of the side mission. She could feel the malice of the main system towards her. System, side mission is 1/4 complete. After Bai Mu's identity was revealed, 1/4 of the side mission was completed. Wei Wei Bai's head hurt. After the effects of the sobriety potion, her body couldn't take it anymore. She raised her hand with difficulty. Just as she was about to sit up, a hand immediately supported her. Wei Wei Bai looked up. It was actually Bai Mu. To read the full article, download the full article to read the full article on. Calm. Chapter 1460. Bai Mu's expression was solemn and tense, and his eyes were dark. He said, "Why are you so stubborn? Why do you have to make yourself like this? Just listen to me, and you'll be free." If this continued, Wei Wei Bai would never be able to escape from that world. Bai Mu looked at her chapped lips, her unhealthily pale skin, and her tired but calm eyes. He felt bitter in his heart. Wei Wei Bai expressionlessly tried to withdraw her hand, but he refused to let go. "Don't you want to clear your name and not mix in that world anymore? Why are you still protecting Gu Nanli?" Wei Wei Bai leaned against the bed and looked at him coldly. "Who I'm protecting has nothing to do with you betraying me. I don't want to clear my name by sending myself to the police station." Bai Mu looked at her silently for a while before sighing. "You won't change anything even if you make a fuss like this. Arresting Gu Nanli is a must. I won't let him escape." Then, without looking at Wei Wei Bai, he poured her a glass of water. Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, "Where are the Bai family members?" Bai Mu paused with the glass in his hand and said, "They're all in prison. Their crimes are basically confirmed. Because the arrest was rushed, many crimes were dug too deep, so no one was sentenced to death. But there were many life sentences." Bai Mu did not continue. He handed the glass of water to Wei Wei Bai. "Drink some." Wei Wei Bai looked away coldly with some disdain. Scram. Bai Mu was stunned for a while. He held the glass with frightening strength. Suddenly, he pressed her down and put the glass to her mouth. "Be good. Listen to your brother. Drink some water." Wei Wei Bai did not notice and was forced to drink a few mouthfuls of water. She almost choked to death. Bai Mu's expression was somewhat sinister, and his eyes were filled with suppressed anger. "You have to listen to me in the future. You know that an elder brother is like a father, right?" Wei Wei Bai, the system was so shocked that it dropped the bag of snacks. "Oh my God, this is an invisible pervert." Wei Wei Bai, "Invisible my ass, it's obvious. This cheap brother was too evil. That's right, he even killed his own father, and his entire family was imprisoned because of him." Her crazy brother was even more frightening than a landmine. He was only satisfied when he made Wei Wei Bai drink water. Then, he stared at her blankly for a while, before suddenly taking out a pair of handcuffs. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "What are you doing? Even the handcuffs are out." The system said, "Maybe this big brother is especially righteous and saw through your evil soul, so he wants to drag you to jail." In the end, Bai Mu grabbed her fragile wrist and roasted her hand on the railing of the bed. "Bai Mu, it's only temporary. If you want to go to the toilet, tell me. I'll go with you." Wei Wei Bai and the system were speechless. He even accompanied her to the toilet. He was even scarier than the jailer. No, which brother would accompany his sister to the toilet? It's not like I'm 1 and you're 3. Don't you know how to avoid suspicion when you're already an adult? Wei Wei Bai, Tongzi, biological siblings will be blocked, right? The system licked the empty bag of snacks. "You're not biological siblings. Bai Mu and Gu Nanli were biological brothers. Perverts were hereditary. Look at these two little perverts." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Bai Mu sat beside her. He fed her, cut an apple for her, and helped her wash her hands and wipe her face. He looked like a good brother. However, Wei Wei Bai could smell his perverted aura. Every time he touched her, she felt like she was being stared at by a wild beast. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here, /transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Download transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1461. The system hugged the empty bag of snacks. It had seen enough of Bai Mu's perverted brother's attitude, so it went to look at Gun Nanli. However, it found that Gun Nanli had already arrived at the entrance of the hospital. The system quickly reminded Wei Wei Bai, the male lead is here. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. When she was being interrogated, she did not say a single bad word about Gun Nanli. After all, there was a turning point in the strategy. She would rather die than reveal Gun Nanli's information. She did not betray him, so this was a turning point. It made him realize that she actually had a good impression of him. Then, when she slowly started to like him, he would not find it strange anymore. After all, if she kept going against him, she would not be able to unravel the mystery of his birth, let alone unravel the defenses in his heart. Wei Wei Bai decided to go with a sweet and heartwarming strategy. She did not mind when he called her ugly in the past. Wei Wei Bai quickly prepared herself. She asked the system, "Am I miserable?" The system looked at her pale face, haggard dark circles under her eyes, and weak appearance. It nodded and said, "You look very miserable." It was obvious that she had been tortured. Although it knew that the host did not suffer too much with the help of the sobriety potion, the appearance could still fool people. Wei Wei Bai, that's right. Wait, am I beautiful? It's that haggard, weak, and pitiful appearance that makes people's heart ache. The system, Wei Wei Bai, it's not miserable enough. It has to be miserable and beautiful, haggard and flawless. If she had a bruised nose, swollen eyes, 2 lines of nosebleeds, and a dirty face, Gun Nanli would not have a good impression of her. The system, beautiful, right? Haha, as long as the host was happy. Suddenly, it felt that there were more than 2 perverts. The host was much more perverted than the 2 brothers. The system silently licked the bag of snacks. In this day and age, it was not fashionable to not be perverted enough. Wei Wei Bai sighed in relief. He's here to save me. It seemed that there were benefits to having a favorable impression of over 60 points. The system was silent for a while. I think he's here to settle the score with you. Wei Wei Bai, ? The system said, Gun Nanli's crimes have been exposed, and now the police are chasing after him. Apparently, you're the one who leaked the information, so he's probably going to kill you before he escapes. Bai Wei Wei. This is all right? Didn't I just work for nothing? She was still thinking about how she could use this heroic act to win an opportunity to change her strategy. Which idiot leaked the information? When Gun Nanli entered the hospital, his phone rang again. His face was cold as he lowered his eyes to look at his phone. His thick eyelashes covered his cold eyes, which were full of murderous intent. Gun Nanli answered the call. Cici said, I'm ready. Come back as soon as you're done. We'll go abroad together. Gun Nanli's eyelids fluttered. His face was hidden in the shadows, and there was a kind of evil yet delicate beauty to it. You go first. I need to confirm something. Cici was already rushing to the airport. He said as he walked, What do you have time to confirm now? Gun Nanli's voice was very calm. I think you're right. Although I can lock her up for life, she can still find a chance to escape. So I want to try to make her fall in love with me and not leave me. Cici, huh? This has to be done slowly. You need to save her and get on the plane quickly. Also, she betrayed you, so you have to be wary of her. Gun Nanli, I'm not going back. She didn't betray me. Cici, wait, that's a bit too much information. He thought. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. /transmigration system. Adonis, come here. / transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Chapter 1462. Before he could finish, CCE had already heard Goon Namli's cold and indifferent voice. I was the one who leaked that information. You have to keep it a secret. I've decided to let her know that it's all her fault that I'm in danger. She'll feel guilty, pity me, and then like me. He had studied some books. It was said that women had maternal instincts. He felt that he could give it a try. CCE, he couldn't figure it out. What the hell was this? Then Goon Namli hung up the phone. CCE was stunned for a long time. He was almost dumbfounded. He wondered if there was something wrong with his ears. Goon Namli sold himself to the police, causing countless people to chase after him and destroy his foundation. Oh, just to woo a woman? What a complicated plan to woo a woman. Damn you, Goon Namli. What kind of plan is this? Your IQ must have been eaten by dogs. Bai Mu forked a piece of apple for Wei Wei Bai. Eat some, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai's face was cold. When are you going to let go of me? Bai Mu looked at her handcuffs indifferently. I'll let go of you when you can be discharged from the hospital. Wei Wei Bai was not surprised at all. She looked at the apple and was silent for a while before she leaned over and bit into it. Her thin red lips were beautifully shaped. When she bit the apple, there was a kind of soft and sharp charm. Bai Mu's hands trembled, and he immediately stood up. His breathing was chaotic, and he looked at her with fear in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have sensed something. She slowly ate the apple and suddenly said, "Brother." These two words, a form of address, lingering to the bone. Bai Mu did not know that a form of address could kill. He had nowhere to hide under her calm but seductive gaze. Wei Wei Bai was finally sure. She looked at him with hatred and suddenly could not suppress her laughter. You don't like me, right? That's impossible. Bai Mu didn't utter a word. He clenched his fists and straightened his back. He was in a sorry state, but he couldn't escape. He wanted to refute, but he didn't know what to say. His heart was in a mess. Those unspeakable and terrifying desires all turned into knives that stabbed into his heart under her sarcasm. Wei Wei Bai's laughter suddenly disappeared. She said coldly, "Disgusting. Simply perverted." Bai Mu's entire body trembled, and he couldn't help but shout angrily in a low voice, "Enough, don't say any more." Wei Wei Bai repeated, "Pervert, falling in love with your own sister, if that's not perverted, then what is?" Bai Mu, who was already suffering from moral torment, finally broke down completely under her intense and disgusted gaze. He rushed to the side of the bed, stretched out his hands, and grabbed her thin and fragile shoulders and pushed her onto the bed. "If I'm a pervert, what are you? You're clearly Goon Namli's plaything, yet you're willing to endure several days of mental interrogation for him. Do you know how much you're sacrificing him? He doesn't like you at all, yet you're willing to sacrifice yourself to this extent for him." Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold, and the corners of her eyes rose into a cold arc. "I'm happy to do so. Mind your own business." These words completely crushed Bai Mu, who was already under a lot of mental pressure. He stared at her face and suddenly lowered his head. But before he could touch her, she suddenly pulled out the gun in his clothes and pressed it against his head. "Let go of me," Wei Wei Bai said fiercely. She had angered him so that he would lose his guard and approach her, so that she could snatch his gun. Bai Mu immediately calmed down. He stared at her blankly for 3 seconds before suddenly saying, "You're very smart, but you're not strong enough. / you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like." Chapter 1463. After saying that, his hand grabbed her wrist at lightning speed and pressed down hard, causing her fingers to lose all strength. The gun fell back into his hands. Wei Wei Bai's intelligence was useless. Her martial prowess was not worth mentioning in front of a real expert. At such a close distance, any weapon would be useless. Wei Wei Bai gasped and slapped Bai Mu's face without hesitation. "It doesn't matter if you're strong or not. You're a pervert." Bai Mu's face turned red from her slap. He glared at her fiercely. Suddenly, Bai Mu seemed to have sensed something. He turned around abruptly, but the door was kicked open. The 2 people guarding the door were subdued. Goon Namli strode in. His face was unnaturally pale like Wei Wei Bai's, and his eyes were dark and cold. Then, he saw that Bai Mu was holding Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai's clothes were a little messy. Bai Mu's breathing was a little unnatural. The two of them were in an ambiguous state. Gu Nanli stopped in his tracks and looked at the two of them without blinking. Then he looked at Bai Mu coldly. His gaze was like that of a venomous snake, causing goosebumps to rise on Bai Mu's back. Bai Mu sneered. Gu Nanli, you're courting death. How dare you barge in here? The hospital was not under Gu Nanli's control. If he barged in now, he would be surrounded later. Gu Nanli's deep and cold eyes were still looking at their interlocked hands. Suddenly, he rushed forward and raised his elbow to hit Bai Mu's face. Bai Mu hurriedly let go of Wei Wei Bai and dodged backward, slamming into the wall. Then, he raised his leg and kicked Gu Nanli's abdomen. Gu Nanli reached out and blocked his leg. His hand was already grabbing Bai Mu's shoulder and breaking it. The crisp sound of bones breaking could be heard. Bai Mu's face was deathly pale. He directly picked up his gun and fired at him. Gu Nanli reached out and nimbly stepped back. The bullet went out of control and shot into the ceiling, but it bounced back. In the direction of the rebound was Wei Wei Bai, who was handcuffed to the hospital bed. Wei Wei Bai, this was too unlucky. The two men who were fighting to the death were fine, but she was the one who died? Gu Nanli's mind went blank. His pupils constricted as he pounced forward. He hugged Wei Wei Bai, and the bullet immediately penetrated his shoulder. His shoulder already had an old injury, and this time, the new injury and the old injury exploded together. Blood splattered everywhere, and the snow-white hospital bed was dyed bright red. Bai Weiwei heard the fierce beating of his heart in his chest. His breath was hot and heavy against her neck, and the trembling of his body also affected her. Weiwei Bai didn't expect that a favorable impression of 65 points could make this man sacrifice himself to this extent. She moved her lips and called out softly, "Gu Nanli?" Gu Nanli replied indifferently, "Yeah." Then he let go of her, blocked her line of sight, and looked at Bai Mu. Bai Mu's face was deathly pale, and his hands and feet were cold as he looked at them. His shot just now had almost killed Weiwei Bai, and the bodyguard who came with Gu Nanli immediately subdued Bai Mu, took away his gun, and punched him in the stomach. Gu Nanli pulled out his gun from his pocket expressionlessly, raised his hand, and shot Bai Mu in the shoulder. Bai Mu trembled in pain. Gu Nanli was so calm that he was cold. Another bullet went into Bai Mu's thigh. This was the cruelest way to kill someone. One bullet after another went into a non-fatal area. Then, after torturing him enough, he killed him. Especially this man's hand. He must break it first. //. Chapter 1464. Just as Gu Nanli was about to pull the trigger again, the sound of several cars stopping came from outside the window. While he was distracted, Bai Mu risked his life to smash a bodyguard away. Then, he jumped onto the windowsill and jumped down. This was the third floor. Weiwei Bai watched Bai Mu's flying performance in shock. Gu Nanli raised his gun and shot Bai Mu in the back. His accuracy was not good enough. He wanted to hit the heart, but he missed the distance and only hit the side of the heart. He didn't know if he was dead or alive. Gu Nanli showed a pained expression as blood gushed out of his shoulder. The bodyguard immediately came over and gave him emergency treatment. Gu Nanli saw Weiwei Bai, who was in a daze. Then, he saw her handcuffs, and a cold, murderous look flashed across his eyes. He took a deep breath and suppressed the dark surge in his heart. Then, he walked to the bed and bent down. He pressed her head into his arms and said softly, "It's okay. Let's go." With that, he raised his gun and broke the handcuffs. Then, he carried the weak Weiwei Bai and walked out. The hospital was surrounded. Gu Nanli was ready. Soon, they left through the escape route. The pursuers who came back to their senses quickly chased after Gu Nanli's car. Gu Nanli's shoulder was covered in blood. His muscles were tight, and it was obvious that the wound was very serious. But he was carrying Weiwei Bai with one hand. The driver was an experienced driver, and the car drifted quickly. Weiwei Bai's mind was a little dazed. The results of the interrogation for the past few days had given her a splitting headache. The tip of her nose was filled with the smell of blood on his body. She looked up and saw his taut jaw, as well as his vigilant and cold eyes. And his hand was stroking her back comfortingly. Wei Wei Bai smiled and said weakly, Gu Nanli, if you fight for me like this, I'll think you like me. Gu Nanli's fingers paused, and he didn't say anything. The person in his arms leaned heavily against him. The familiar scent and temperature made his tense nerves relax a lot. He hugged her hand and couldn't help but hug her tighter. After losing her for a period of time, he realized that he was seriously dependent on her. It was like being poisoned. Even if he didn't know whether to love or not, he knew whether a person was special or not. She was special, so special that he was willing to lay a trap to catch her. Gu Nanli felt that it would be easier to fool her when she was so weak. So he was silent for a while and said reluctantly, he said, I do like you. He sounded a little guilty when he said this, because he didn't know how to react to liking someone. He was more possessive of her now. However, all women liked men with honey in their mouths, so he tried to be this kind of man. After he finished confessing, he waited for her to cry and hug him back. But after waiting for a while, he looked down and saw that she had fallen asleep with her eyes closed. Her long eyelashes covered her eyes, and she looked too tired. Gu Nanli was stunned. He stared at her for a few seconds and couldn't help kissing her eyes. This action was filled with a sense of treasure, but he didn't realize how gentle his actions were. Ding! The male lead's affection has increased to 70. Gu Nanli looked up and said to the driver, There's a hotel in front. Stop there. The driver quickly obeyed and stopped the car. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. / transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. Chapter 1465. Gu Nanli endured the pain in his shoulder. I didn't do much. He just carried Wei Wei Bai out of the car. Wei Wei Bai leaned against him quietly and softly. Her face was splattered with a few drops of his blood. Her fair face and bright red color made her look unusually delicious. Gu Nanli's eyes darkened, but he suppressed the thought of being worse than a beast. He turned back and said to the driver, Flip the car down the mountain and then leave by yourself. You don't need to follow me. The driver was shocked. Mr. Gu, this is too dangerous. Of course it was dangerous. This area was full of people who wanted to catch him, and there was no protection and no car. How could he escape? Gu Nanli had already thought about it. He had gone from a gangster with nothing to where he was today. He didn't rely on fantasy. With Wei Wei Bai, he still had the ability to escape from the people who wanted to catch him. If he escaped so easily, it would be a waste of the opportunity to show his pitiful side. Gu Nanli sent the driver away with a cold look. The driver could only drive the car to flip the car. After working for so long, this was the first time he had seen such a strange order. Gu Nanli carried her into the hotel. He knew that she was like this because of the interrogation and mental torture, but her body was fine. He put her on the bed. Under the light, she didn't sleep well. Her brows were tightly knitted, as if she was still suffering from a nightmare. Gu Nanli half squatted by the bed. The wound on his shoulder had been treated simply. Although the blood didn't gush out, the bullet wasn't taken out. He had been injured many times, but this injury wasn't the worst. After stopping the bleeding, he also took strong anti-inflammatory drugs and painkillers before getting into the car. So there was no major problem for the time being. Gu Nanli was waiting for her to wake up. This was a trap or a cage. To him, it was just a plan. His illness couldn't be separated from Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't sleep without her, and he couldn't even eat. He felt irritable looking at everything. He wanted her to stay by his side obediently, just like how she stayed in his safe. She didn't want to run away anytime, anywhere. Money, power, and threats could not achieve this 100% success rate. CCE's words reminded him that love was also a very powerful weapon. It could trap people, make her fall in love with him so that she won't run away. As for how to make her fall in love with him, he thought about his plan. He would pretend to love her and then save the damsel in distress. Just now, the bullet had bounced off the light fixture on the ceiling before it brushed past Wei Wei Bai's bed. As for the direction of the shot, he estimated that Wei Wei Bai should be able to dodge it. So he pounced on her and hugged her, deliberately taking a bullet to save the beauty. Perfect. Then, he framed her. She didn't betray him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent to the hospital. This was out of his expectations. He had placed the information that had been passed through many hands, and even many of them were fake, in a place where she could easily access them. She didn't even open a single page. After he was caught, he didn't even say a single bad word about him. So he had no choice but to leak the secret and then pin the blame on her. Then, he would pretend to forgive her. She would feel that he was very good to her. Perfect. Next, he would pretend to be pitiful. His career was gone, and he was being hunted down, but he still didn't give up on her. He had already done this much. Even a dog loved him. She would definitely fall in love with him. Gu Nanli smoothly ran through his plan and found that everything was perfect. When she woke up, the plan would begin. Chapter 1466. Gu Nanli's shoulder was covered in blood as he stared blankly at Wei Wei Bai. He stared blankly at Wei Wei Bai, not daring to treat his wound as he was afraid that it was not bad enough. Wei Wei Bai had enough sleep, but her body was still weak. The system used a few days of life points to buy her some body recovery drinks. It was actually for the system, so it was very cheap. If it was for a human, a little bit would help her recover. But if it was too much, she would have epilepsy. So the system got a big bottle of orange juice that it bought for the host, which was actually for itself. Wei Wei Bai drank a little bit of the juice and felt refreshed. She said to the system, "What's the situation? Is Gu Nanli caught? Or is he going to die?" It would be best if Gu Nanli was messed with so badly that she could gain more favorability points. The system was at a loss for words. It could only tell the truth. The male lead asked the driver to overturn the car while he hugged you and waited for others to kill him. Wei Wei Bai thought about it calmly and concluded, "Is there something wrong with his brain?" The system said, "His heart is in water. He wants to woo you." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's really fate, so am I." The system said, "He's acting pitiful to woo you." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's okay. I'm acting cute. We don't clash." The system said, "He even leaked the secret to frame you. You didn't leak the secret, so he's blaming it on you to get your favorability points." Wei Wei Bai said, "Go ahead if you can. It's my loss." They went back and forth, basically explaining Gu Nanli's old-fashioned plan to woo girls. Gu Nanli saw her eyelashes tremble slightly, as if she was about to wake up. He immediately looked around calmly, looked at the floor, and immediately laid down on the floor. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes and realized, "Where's Gu Nanli?" A broken groan came from beside the bed. She immediately got up and looked down. He saw that Gu Nanli's face was deathly pale. His face was covered in cold sweat as he curled up on the ground. He stretched out his hand and pinched his arm tightly, as if he was enduring intense pain. On his handsome face, his thin red lips were like fragile petals, tightly pursed. Blood was seeping out of the wound on his shoulder, making him look extremely miserable. Wei Wei Bai could only give him full marks for this pathetic act. Wei Wei Bai also entered the zone. She staggered off the bed and patted Gu Nanli's face. "What's wrong with you, little husky?" Gu Nanli was breathing heavily. His eyelids were half closed, and his skin was covered in cold sweat. He was indeed injured, but he had endured until now to treat it. Wei Wei Bai touched his face and saw the wound on his shoulder. She immediately pried his hand away and tore open the clothes on his shoulder. She saw the bloody wound inside. Her lips trembled. "Why did you take the bullet for me? Don't you even want a hand?" Gu Nanli looked up at her with a scrutinizing gaze. Then he finally saw the fear in her eyes instead of impatient disgust. He didn't know why, but he heaved a sigh of relief. The pain from the wound was overwhelming. When he was alone, the pain from these wounds was tolerable. But when he saw that she was worried, he groaned even louder, and his breathing became even more chaotic. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that she touched Gu Nanli all over. Gu Nanli's body trembled even more. Wei Wei Bai finally found the military knife that he had hidden. When she pulled it out, her fingers were trembling badly. "I have to remove the bullet for you." Gu Nanli hurriedly said, "The bullet passed through my shoulder and didn't stay in my body." Actually, he had removed it from the car. Otherwise, the bullet would have caused him to bleed out completely. /say button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1467. Wei Bai was at a loss for a while before she reacted. Her eyes were cold. What do you mean, Gu Nanli? Gu Nanli was provoked by her cold eyes, and his breathing became heavier. He was bare-chested, and a simple bandage on his shoulder was very conspicuous. The muscles on his arms and chest were slightly bulging because he was too agitated. I've already received news that you've leaked all the information about my career to Bai Mu. The arrest warrant has probably arrived at my house. His voice was calm and cold, but the heat in his eyes could hardly be hidden. Wei Bai looked at him for a while and suddenly laughed. You think I'm the one who betrayed you? How do you think I found out about your career secrets? You didn't give me a chance to get close to you, except in bed. Gu Nanli pursed his lips, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. You had a chance. I didn't guard against you. You can enter and leave my study at any time. The smile on Wei Bai's face disappeared. Gu Nanli, do you really believe that I will betray you? Under her cold gaze, Gu Nanli could hear the dark thoughts in her heart. Yes, this time, he also felt that she would betray him, although it was unexpected that she did not betray him. But what about next time? What about next time? There would be a day when she would betray him again. Only then did Gu Nanli realize how distrustful he was of her. His hand slowly touched her face, and his fingers suddenly pinched her chin. He lowered his eyes and said softly, It's okay if you betray me. I still want you. This was not a plan. This was his true thoughts. He still wanted her, even if she really betrayed him. Wei Bai looked at him coldly and suddenly reached out to pinch the wound on his shoulder. The wound that was already bandaged split open again. Blood splattered on her face and body, and it looked unusually sad. It's a pity that I'm not interested in you. Gu Nanli's pupils shrank, and the dark coldness in his eyes was about to overflow. Wei Bai pushed him fiercely. Get out of my way. You actually think that I would betray you. Why don't you just shoot me? Why are you still pretending to be a saint? Gu Nanli did not expect her reaction to be so big. Shouldn't she be happy that he was willing to forgive her? He was at a loss for a while, and finally, the corners of his mouth twisted. Didn't you betray me? After I caught you, I didn't shoot you. It's not the first time I've been the Holy Father. Wei Bai's gaze was terrifyingly sharp, but her voice was surprisingly gentle. Gu Nanli, would you believe me if I said that I didn't betray you? It was not a matter of whether he believed it or not. She really didn't betray him this time. Gu Nanli was not a straightforward man. Plans could not keep up with changes. Was she so angry because he had wronged her? He immediately calmed down and said, I believe you. I believe everything you say. Wei Bai, you're speaking the truth. I'm too embarrassed to continue acting like this. Gu Nanli, on the other hand, was eagerly waiting for her feelings to change. He saved the beauty, forgave her, trusted her, and pretended to like her. If she still did not like him, he could only give up on this plan. It was too troublesome to chase after women. It was better to keep it locked up. Wei Bai had a complicated expression on her face. It seemed like she was in disbelief, but also seemed like she was in doubt. It was more like she was tired and sad. She muttered to herself softly, I want to betray you too, but, however, the rest of her words were swallowed by his kiss. The smell of blood on Gu Nanli's body intertwined with the heat of his excitement, turning into a kind of lingering and imprisoning force that held her in his arms. Chapter 1468. Therefore, he was only shot in the shoulder, and there were no other problems with the rest of his body. Moreover, it was not a dangerous rainforest or other harsh environment. To him, this kind of escape was really a piece of cake. Therefore, Wei Bai, who had never escaped before, was pulled away by Gu Nanli. The hotel was very quiet. Gu Nanli smoothly went out from the back door, stole the hotel owner's van, stuffed her into the passenger seat, and drove away. He said, the people chasing us don't know that we are here, and Bai Mu is probably going to die, so there is no effective chase. Leaving in the middle of the night will minimize the danger. Wei Bai yawned lazily. What will you do in the future? A lot of information had been leaked, and an arrest warrant had been sent to them. Gu Nanli was now a suspect. He had the same status as her. What good match? When Gu Nanli heard this question, his chance to act pitiful came. His expression immediately turned ugly, and his tone became forced. It's okay. At most I will be arrested and sentenced to death, or I will keep running, and in the future, change my name and become a hooligan. From a mafia boss to a hooligan. This was too big a leap. And didn't he know how to do other jobs? He didn't want to turn over a new leaf and become a hooligan when he was cornered. He wanted to be a waiter, a roadside barbecue stall owner, or a street cleaner. Indeed, there was no normal job in the minds of bad people, and they could only follow the path to the end. When Wei Wei Bai was feeling sad about the loss of morality, Gu Nanli's voice was a little hesitant. In the future, when I am in dire straits, will you still follow me? Wei Wei Bai sneered. Who will like you when you are poor? When you are rich, I didn't like you either. Of course, for the sake of the good feelings, Wei Wei Bai could only go against her conscience and say vaguely, you won't be in dire straits. If she directly said that she would follow him, it would be strange if he believed her. This ambiguous answer made Gu Nanli tighten his grip on the steering wheel. Did she believe that he could make a comeback? Gu Nanli knew that it wouldn't be easy to get her to follow him for a while, but it wasn't bad to get this answer. His expression was calm, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve into a smile. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, give me the gun. Gu Nanli was silent for a moment. His eyes couldn't help but turn cold. Giving her a gun was giving her a choice. It was easy for her to stay or leave. But when he thought of his plan, he still hesitantly threw his gun to her. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. She disassembled the gun for practice and then put it back together again. Your shoulder is injured. If there are pursuers later, just focus on driving. Leave the rest to me. His simple words made people feel at ease. Gu Nanli saw that her movements were nimble and smooth, and the process of assembling the weapon was perfect. A hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. No matter how many times he saw it, he felt that her method of disassembling and assembling the weapon was miraculously beautiful. He had tried, but he couldn't reach her hand speed. If there was a hint of jealousy in the past, it was pure admiration now. Suddenly, a few cars rushed out from a diagonal corner, and Bing Bing fired at their car. Wei Wei Bai frowned. They caught up so quickly. Gu Nanli pursed his lips, not daring to expose himself. Because Bai Mu was on the verge of death, the people in charge of their case at the police station were in a mess. Chapter 1469. Gu Nanli only received the news before leaving the hotel that those guys would not chase after them for the time being. They were all in the hospital trying to save Bai Mu. Hence, Gu Nanli had no choice but to call back and get a few cars to chase after them. Otherwise, how could he pretend to be pitiful and down and out? Chasing women was really troublesome. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her wrist and took a deep breath. I'm still not used to killing people. This sentence was indescribably weak, but surprisingly, Gu Nanli did not hate it. She was not used to killing people, but it was normal. Although she was the daughter of the Bai family, she did not grow up by Bai Qi's side. Instead, she was sent overseas to be a greenhouse flower. Bai Qi had never thought of pulling her into this world. If Bai Qi had not been killed, she probably would not have come back and would have lived a peaceful life overseas. She might have met a good man, gotten married, and had children. She would have nothing to do with him. Gu Nanli's heart turned cold. He felt that Bai Qi's death was not bad. At least he met her. The emotional fluctuation when he heard that his biological father had died disappeared just like that. Wei Wei Bai rolled down the car window and stared at the streetlights outside. Suddenly, she leaned out and fired at the chasing cars mercilessly. The powerful recoil of the gun hurt her wrist, but she didn't hesitate and aimed at the wheels of the other party's car. The tires of the chasing cars burst, and some flipped over. The ear-piercing sound of the car sliding, the sound of gunshots, and the sound of the streetlights being hit by the cars. They intertwined into a soul-stirring sound. Gu Nanli looked at her from the side and saw her nimble posture, short hair flying back, eyes sharp and cold, and her cold face as delicate and fair as jade. Soft and cold, gorgeous and pure. At the same time, they appeared on her at this moment. He had never thought that a woman could be so beautiful. All his stunning feelings came from the same woman. Wei Wei Bai ran out of bullets and sat down expressionlessly. Then, she removed the empty magazine. Do you have any more? Of course there was, but Gu Nanli said softly, no, I came out in too much of a hurry. He also had a gun on him in case she suddenly ran away and to kill the enemy. A trace of annoyance flashed across Wei Wei Bai's face. She pulled out the military knife that she had taken from Gu Nanli. If they catch up to you, you can run first. After all, I won't be sentenced to death, even if I get caught. Gu Nanli's fingers almost slipped. A complicated emotion flashed through his eyes. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to know about his complicated feelings. Instead, she said calmly, when they catch up with you later, just drive off the side of the road and into the alley. I will deal with the aftermath for you. Gu Nanli was at a loss for words. He was so angry that he laughed. How are you going to clean up after me with your three-legged cat skills? Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm. With my life. Just 3 simple words. There was no hesitation at all. Gu Nanli looked up at her. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Under the light of the street lamps, her face was so calm. Her bare face lacked the beauty of makeup, but it was still as bright and beautiful as the moon. She didn't seem to think that she had said anything extraordinary. Gu Nanli looked at her in a daze. His hoarse voice sounded a little strange in the roar of the car. You're willing to save me with your life? / Chapter 1470. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. What's wrong with saving you? I don't like owing debts. You saved my life, so I'll repay you with my life. This is what I should do. Gu Nanli's joy was dampened by the cold water that she had just felt. He suddenly said fiercely, Are you like this to everyone? Wei Wei Bai was stunned, then looked away unnaturally. Her voice was hesitant, right? You have to pay back what you owe. It's the same no matter who you owe. These words were not just any ordinary heart-wrenching. She did not like him, but she wanted to repay her debts. Gu Nanli thought of the first time he saw her. She was also like this. She had said from the very beginning that whoever she owed could make her pay her debts. Many of the people who were about to leave the Bai clan stayed because of this sentence. A thought flashed through Gu Nanli's mind. If she owed him, she would not be able to pay it back. Would she also stay? The system yawned, holding the super beautiful wine glass it used to indulge in wine and women. It drank the cheapest, almost expired orange juice. Then it said to Wei Wei Bai, those cars were sent by the male lead. Your cheap brother is seriously injured. Without him, there is no way to organize an effective chase. After all, Gu Nanli's case was personally handled by Bai Mu. If he fell, who would dare to take his credit? Moreover, they did not have the ability to do so. They could only wait for him to be rescued or directly die before they could deal with Gu Nanli. Wei Wei Bai looked calm. I know. Evolving from a steely straight man to a scheming boy is also considered an improvement. Gu Nanli lowered his eyes and stared at the road, deep in thought. The truck entered the port. Gu Nanli said, There's a smuggling boat here. Let's get on the boat and leave. Wei Wei Bai immediately opened the door and cautiously looked out. She found only a lonely boat, emitting a dim light. This ship seemed to have been sent by Gu Nanli. Of course, she didn't show anything strange. She turned around and said to Gu Nanli, There's no one else. Let's go. Gu Nanli nodded. When he opened the door, he suddenly groaned in pain and clutched his shoulder. Wei Wei Bai immediately asked worriedly, What's wrong? Gu Nanli immediately restrained himself. His face was a little pale. The youthful feeling of youth actually made others feel that he was abnormally weak. He said calmly, I'm fine, but his voice still revealed his painful trembling. Wei Wei Bai, why didn't I see you in so much pain when we were in bed? Keep pretending, keep pretending. She had long realized that Gu Nanli's pain tolerance was super awesome. The gunshot wound on his shoulder did not allow him to show any expression of pain. If she was in so much pain that she couldn't move, would he have pushed her onto the bed? It didn't matter if the blood splattered all over the bed. The innkeeper, on the morrow, would think that there had been a murder in his room. Didn't he still wake up in the middle of the night, treat his own wound, and get her a new set of clothes before waking her up? Moreover, when she woke up, He even fed her a can of unknown drink. Full stomach and refreshed spirit. She didn't know how this guy got it. He clearly didn't have a single subordinate by his side. And the system was even worse. When she was sleeping, it was also sleeping. Because it was surrounded by a bullet screen army, it would cover its head and sleep when it was sleepy. It only woke up when Wei Wei Bai woke up. If Gu Nanli wanted to strangle her in the middle of the night, the system would probably have to send her a funeral. Gu Nanli pretended for a while and realized that the other party really seemed to think that he was fine. Transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here, /transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here / transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Download transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here transmigration system. Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1471. Not good enough to act pitiful. He frowned and was about to make it more obvious. Just then, he heard the door of the passenger seat close with a bang. Gu Nanli, Wei Wei Bai got out of the car and didn't even look at him. When a woman was ruthless, there was nothing a man could do. For the first time, Gu Nanli felt a childish discomfort in his heart. He was a little angry and wanted to open the door. However, the door suddenly opened and he saw Wei Wei Bai standing outside the car. She raised her hand and looked worried. Come down, I'll support you. Gu Nanli looked at her hand for a while, and then his gaze fell on her worried face. Her beautiful eyes and suppressive aura softened and made her skin look even whiter. Gu Nanli stared blankly for a few seconds before reaching out to hold her hand. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his strange and complicated gaze. She held his wrist firmly with her fingers and held his arm with her other hand. She walked with him step by step. It was a strange experience for Gu Nanli to be supported by someone. After all, this was the posture of a weakling. But surprisingly, he didn't hate it all. He hated weaklings the most. If it wasn't to make her feel good, he wouldn't have used such a stupid method to carry out his plan. When they reached the port, she carefully pulled him onto the boat and then turned to deal with the captain. Gu Nanli stood behind her and stared at her intently. As he watched, he realized that she was actually bargaining. She said, seeing that we're so good-looking, let's make it cheaper, big brother. The captain said, big sister, you're good-looking and your man is good-looking, but good-looking can't make a living. Gu Nanli, what kind of godly conversation is this? When he was at his lowest, he wouldn't bargain with people on a boat that was escaping for his life. Wei Wei Bai said, why not? I'm happy to see it, so I won't be hungry. The captain said, although that's true, we can't be stingy with money. Seeing that the bargaining was about to fail, Li Yundong thought. Wei Wei Bai tugged at Gu Nanli. Who's missing your boat? Let's go to the next boat. Gu Nanli, who had never seen haggling in a wet market, was speechless. The boatman could only stretch out his hand to persuade them to stay. All right. We're about to set sail. I'll give you a discount. Wei Wei Bai gave Gu Nanli a sly and cute smile. This smile was another side of her that he had never seen before. Gu Nanli looked at her without blinking. If he had kept her locked up, she would not have shown him such an unguarded smile. This was the first time Gu Nanli felt so lucky. He wanted her to let down her guard. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 80. System. This is the tragic story of a person who tried to sell his pitiful strategy, but was countered by the host. The ship finally set sail before dawn. Wei Wei Bai brought hot water and a towel from the boatman. She soaked the towel in hot water and wrung it dry before wiping Gu Nanli's face. Gu Nanli sat there without daring to move. He didn't have any of his usual cleverness. Wei Wei Bai said, does it still hurt? Gu Nanli shook his head. It's fine. He leaned against the porthole. There were still stars in the sky as her hand softly stroked his face. He had never felt such a peaceful moment before. Even if they were escaping, he felt that as long as she was here, he would feel at ease. The beastly nature in his body was soothed by her. Gu Nanli's eyes also became gentle. He suddenly reached out to hug her and buried his head in her shoulder. The fragrance of her long hair floated to his nose. Wei Wei, you like me. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. 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 Chapter 1472. It was a sincere sentence. He said many times. Every time he said it, his mood was different. This time, it was more gentle. She could do whatever she wanted. If she really wanted to follow him, she wouldn't run around. He taught her, nurtured her, and was willing to be her guide. He was even her father who guided her spiritually. When the underworld's godfather taught their children, he also used this kind of wholehearted method. If she didn't run away, he was willing to give up his godfather's feelings and do his best to pave the way for her. As long as she loved him. Gu Nanli's breathing deepened. He even became a little nervous. Her face was pressed against his chest. She could hear his rapid heartbeat. In the cold wind, his skin was unbearably hot. Gu Nanli heard Wei Wei Bai suddenly say softly, "No." It was a very calm word. Even if it was a little hesitant, it still heavily shattered Gu Nanli's expectations. His body stiffened. The gentleness in his eyes turned into a cold chill. Sure enough, it still didn't work. Women were too hard to chase. Build a cage and lock her up, pamper her, and raise her until she became useless. She could only rely on him. If he didn't let her grow, if he didn't give her resources, even if she was an eagle, she would be raised into a delicate flower by him, unable to withstand the wind and rain. This way, even if she wanted to run away every day, she wouldn't be able to. Gu Nanli only had two plans in his mind. She fell in love with him, she wouldn't run away. He gave her everything to make her strong. She rejected him, didn't want to stay by his side. Then he would lock her up until she became useless. Wei Wei Bai was tightly hugged by him. She couldn't see his expression, but she felt that the atmosphere was a little stagnant. She asked the system, "What's the situation now?" The system carefully drank the diluted orange juice. Not only did it dilute the orange juice it bought, it also diluted it when drinking it. The ratio was 9:1. The water was 9:1. This way, they could drink for a long time, until they reached the next plane. It said while licking the drink, "Oh, it feels like the male lead is scheming something. He doesn't look like a good person." That gloomy expression and sinister gaze were enough to scare a child to tears. It was a little confused. "Don't you want the heartwarming strategy? Why did you reject him?" Wei Wei Bai said, "He won't believe it until the time is right." She simply loved him to the point of death? Who would believe that? Even a ghost would not believe it. Gu Nanli was not a fool. He was just asking impulsively. If there was not a big twist, he would not believe that she could really fall in love with him. They didn't have the opportunity to fall in love. Wei Wei Bai was all too familiar with the rhythm of how to deepen love. Now was definitely not a good time to say that she loved him. Gu Nanli suddenly stroked her long, silky hair and said softly, "All right, I won't force you. You can leave when you're free." How magnanimous. Wei Wei Bai silently despised him. Acting, you scheming king, continue acting. Be careful of the splits. She could only play along with him. Her hand suddenly gripped his clothes tightly, and a trace of trembling flashed through her eyes. Gu Nanli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of hope, but she did not say anything and continued to stay in his arms silently. This bit of hope made him narrow his eyes. A dangerous light appeared in his eyes. Perhaps he had not done enough. She needed a bigger event to move her. Gu Nanli quietly hugged her, but his eyes coldly looked around. Then, a small black object that looked like a grain of rice appeared on his finger. After he pressed the item, he disappeared again. It was a distress communicator. Slash. Chapter 1473. After the signal was sent out, someone would come to rescue them within half an hour. Gu Nanli knew that half an hour should be enough. He touched Wei Wei Bai's hair and said softly, "I think there's something wrong with that crew member. I'll go and take a look." Wei Wei Bai didn't object. She left his arms and pulled out the knife. She said coldly, "I'll go." Gu Nanli pressed her shoulder with one hand. "I'm more experienced. If there's a trap, I'll call you." Wei Wei Bai looked up at him with a trace of obvious worry in her eyes. Then she looked away. "Okay, go." Gu Nanli nodded and turned around. There was a gloomy smile on his face. There were 2 crew members on the ship, but they were both veterans. This was a complete smuggling ship. If they encountered someone tough, they would deliver the goods seriously. If they encountered someone weak, they would directly kill and rob them. They were all rotten to the core of society. After Goon Namli walked out of the cabin, he saw the captain and the crew on the deck. The captain was a little embarrassed and immediately got up. "I'm sorry, big brother." A gentle smile appeared on Goon Namli's pretty face. "No, I'm the one who's sorry." After saying that, he raised his hand and shot him cleanly. The gunshot seemed to have been silenced and was covered by the sound of the waves. The crew member reacted and was about to scream in horror when a bullet had already pierced his head. To Goon Namli, dealing with the 2 of them was just a matter of raising her hand and retracting it in passing. After killing the people, he calmly looked at the direction of the waves and then looked at the weather. It wouldn't rain, and there shouldn't be high waves on the sea. This kind of weather was just right. Goon Namli walked familiarly to the room where the crew kept the weapons. There was a box full of guns and miscellaneous weapons. Many of them were probably robbed after killing people. Goon Namli didn't look at them more. These were no different from trash to him. He reached out and found a small bomb. This thing could squeeze out a large hole in the ship, but it wouldn't affect by Wei Wei's side. He opened the packaging of the bomb and placed it on the floor of the boat. Then, he calmly took out a cigarette. It's a lady's cigarette. This was prepared for Wei Wei Bai. Back at the hotel, when he was looking for clothes for her, he had also taken the brand new cigarettes from the hotel counter. He didn't smoke, but he was willing to indulge her. She was not a heavy smoker and only smoked a stick once in a while. It would not cause any serious health problems for her. And Goon Namli had to admit that the way she smoked in a languid and dazed manner, damn pretty and elegant. In fact, it was extremely tempting. Goon Namli lit the cigarette. She hesitated for a moment before putting it to her lips and taking a puff. He had never smoked before. When it came to his own health, he had self-discipline to the point of morbidity. Before he met Wei Wei Bai, he had not even played with women, let alone cigarettes. Except for the wine, because of his insomnia. Goon Namli felt suffocated. He couldn't help but cover his mouth and cough. He awkwardly threw the cigarette onto the cotton and ignited the bomb. Then he coughed and walked out. This thing, she could actually look so good smoking it. How'd she do it? The timing of the bomb was just right. He walked far away, and it suddenly exploded. The water poured into the cabin. Soon the boat would sink. Goon Namli sized himself up and felt that he was not miserable enough. He had to make it seem as if he was truly pitiful. He did not hesitate. He aimed the gun at his calf and found a good position to shoot. The bullet smoothly brushed past his calf. It was a scary wound, but it did not hurt the bones and meridians. It was basically a wound that would not be a big problem once the blood stopped. Goon Namli laughed coldly. His eyes were deep and had a sinister light. At this moment, he was evil and exquisite. The coldness on his pale face made people shudder, but he was also flawlessly handsome. If you're still not tempted by this, I won't give you a chance. The cage was already prepared. It was surrounded by the sea on all sides. The castle was built on the cliff. He was just waiting to lock up a princess. If she was not tempted, he would turn into an evil dragon and lock her up. /////. Chapter 1474. Goon Namli put away his gun, and then a pained expression appeared on his face. He was covered in blood as he held the only life buoy. He hurriedly rushed back. Wei Wei Bai had already sensed that something was wrong. She ran out of the cabin and was about to ask what was going on. Goon Namli rushed over, covered in blood. He looked anxious. The crew wanted to kill me, so I killed them. But the bomb on the ship exploded. This ship is going to sink. After he finished speaking, he put the life buoy around her waist. When a ship sinks, you have to swim away immediately. Otherwise, you will be sucked into the whirlpool. He touched her face, his voice a little hoarse as he stared at her. Wei Wei Bai frowned. What about you? Goon Namli paused. His legs were trembling, and more blood was gushing out. He twitched the corner of his mouth. My stamina is better than yours. I can escape. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Okay, I believe you can do it. I'll go into the water first. You have to catch up with me quickly." After she finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped off the ship and ran away with the life buoy. Gu Nanli, wait, didn't she see his injured leg? Didn't she see his pained expression? Did she really believe that he could swim by himself? Wasn't she afraid that he would drown? Gu Nanli stood alone on the sinking ship. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning. At least she should have hesitated so that he would have staggered and fallen. Let's see if she would save him. This way, he wouldn't be sure if she loved him and would immediately run away. Or did she like him in her heart, but really believe that he was powerful? Gu Nanli hesitated for a moment and immediately took a cloth to bandage his wound. What a waste of shot. Wei Wei Bai didn't notice at all. He saw the position and immediately jumped down. After Gu Nanli entered the water, the ship surged violently and caused a whirlpool. He had calculated his position and could easily escape, but his legs suddenly cramped. He was especially calm when it came to cramps in the water. He dived into the water and reached out to grab his cramping leg, massaging it along his meridians. As long as he did not panic, cramps in the water were not difficult for him to deal with. Only after his feet were massaged did he emerge from the water. The early morning sun had begun to shine on the surface of the water. He took a closer look. Where was Wei Wei Bai? Didn't he swim far away with a life buoy? That should be in front of him. Out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly saw a familiar figure swimming towards the huge whirlpool caused by the ship. Wasn't this courting death? If they were sucked into the whirlpool, they would lose their lives. When Gu Nanli saw Wei Wei Bai swimming into the whirlpool, he slapped the water fiercely. "Wei Wei Bai, what are you doing?" Amidst the noise, Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just heard his voice. She suddenly turned around and saw him. Then Gu Nanli saw a flash of ecstasy in her eyes, but in the next second, she was sucked into the whirlpool. Gu Nanli, he wanted to act pitiful to gain her favor. In the end, she seemed to be worse than him. He sighed helplessly and dove into the water. This time, he would probably have old injuries on his legs and shoulders when he went to the hospital this time. Chasing women was too troublesome. In the water, Gu Nanli saw Wei Wei Bai at the edge of the whirlpool. Her black hair curled and floated in the water. Her snow-white face was bloodless, like a sea demon in the water. She was lifeless and exquisite. Gu Nanli's heart tightened. He quickly swam to her side and hugged her. The sound of a helicopter came from the sky. When Gu Nanli heard the sound, he knew that it was his distress signal. // Chapter 1475. Even with his strength, he couldn't break free from this huge whirlpool. He carried her out of the water, but in the next second, he was pressed back into the water by the oncoming water. The power of the whirlpool pulled them down. The next moment, a familiar voice shouted, "Gu, what are you doing? Fancy artistic swimming?" After this voice, a rope ladder with a heavy object fell into the water. Gu Nanli immediately grabbed the rope ladder, and the ladder kept rising. It was like a moment of life and death, and the two of them were almost done for. Gu Nanli was pulled onto the helicopter by CCE's rescue team. The doctors on the helicopter immediately gave them first aid. Gu Nanli had many wounds, and after being soaked in seawater, it was a ghastly sight. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, had fainted because she choked on water. Seeing that the doctor was about to give Wei Wei Bai a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, Gu Nanli pushed the doctor away and almost pushed him off the helicopter. Then, he clasped Wei Wei Bai's face and gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. One of them was covered in blood, and his flesh was white. It was horrifying to look at. The other was unconscious and wet all over. Cici was speechless and wanted to bang her head against the wall. After saving Wei Wei Bai with great difficulty, he immediately pulled the simple curtain and changed her clothes. CCE, the doctor, and the rescue team all had their backs to the curtain, and they were all speechless. Especially the doctor. He felt that he was useless. After pulling the curtain open with great difficulty, Gu Nanli's indifferent face appeared. Okay, she's fine. She just choked on water. Let her sleep for a while and give her a dose of nutrition injection. CCE was speechless for a while before he said helplessly, "Brother, can you tell me that you managed to get a woman after all this fuss?" This chasing of a woman was like a Hollywood battle. He had never seen it before. Gu Nanli was silent for a while before he reached out and rubbed his tired face. I still have to test her. When I had cramps just now, she couldn't see me and directly swam into the whirlpool to save me. Does this mean she likes me? After all, she cherished her life so much. Furthermore, the speed at which she escaped was much faster than him. She swam headfirst into the whirlpool to save him. Cici was afraid of him and immediately said, "Not only do I like you, I even love you. If I didn't love you, how could I give you my life?" Gu Nanli stared blankly for a while. A trace of astonishment flashed through his dark eyes. He couldn't help pursing his lips into a strangely childish smile. "That's good. I didn't waste my efforts." After saying that, he suddenly fell down. Cici immediately reached out to hold him and found that his body was abnormally cold. Even his breathing had weakened. Cici's expression changed. He pulled the doctor over. "Quick, save him." When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she found herself lying in the hospital. This was a familiar hospital. She sighed and said, "Did Gu Nanli court his own death?" The feeling of being counterattacked was extremely satisfying. She didn't have to do anything. She just had to wait for Gu Nanli to act pretentiously. The system glanced at Gu Nanli's ward. He's out of danger. The male lead was very lucky. No matter what he did, he wouldn't die. Wei Wei Bai nodded. "It's my turn to do it. He's worked hard." The system silently drank its orange juice. "You two are so pretentious. Forget about courting death." When Cici heard the nurse say that Wei Wei Bai had woken up, he immediately rushed out. He still had to perform the tragic and great deed of Gu Nanli dying. Tui, injuring himself into a vegetative state. Cici pushed open the door and entered. He saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed. Her delicate wrist was placed beside the bed. Under the needle, faint blue veins could be seen. The slash, the forward slash, forward slash. Chapter 1476. Her expression was indifferent as she looked up at him. What happened to Gu Nanli? Cici almost couldn't take it any more under her sharp and clear gaze. They were both smart people and would be exposed if they weren't careful. Cici was still waiting for Gu Nanli to settle the girl and send him back to his house. He wanted to help settle the difficult eldest brother so that he could smoothly take over. He didn't have Gu Nanli's cleverness. It was difficult for him to do it alone. Cici's face showed a trace of grief. "It's nothing, he's fine." The wounds on his shoulder and calf weren't fatal. It was just that they had been soaked in water for a long time and would need to be reconstructed. Wei Wei Bai looked at Cici coldly without saying a word. Suddenly, she grabbed the drip needle and threw it away. Blood seeped out from under the skin of her wrist. It was a ghastly sight. She walked out directly in a threatening manner. Cici hurriedly stopped her. "Really, Gu Nanli is fine. He's fine. You still need to rest. You can't run and jump around like this." Wei Wei Bai grabbed Cici's collar and slammed him against the wall. Her eyes were red with boiling anger. Something happened to him, right? Was he not fished out from the sea? Is he dead? Cici felt that something was wrong with her cold gaze. He didn't dare to struggle and only said hesitantly, "He was rescued." Wei Wei Bai shouted angrily, "Where is he? Take me there." She didn't believe that Gu Nanli had been rescued. The grief in her eyes was incomparably moving. Cici didn't dare to be too careless and said carefully, "He was rescued, but he's in a vegetative state. I heard from the doctor that he hit his head when he fell into the water from the boat. But because he saw you being sucked into the whirlpool and tried his best to save you, he was hit in the head by a wooden plank. After he was rescued, he couldn't wake up." Wei Wei Bai was stunned and looked at him blankly. She seemed unable to understand what he was saying. Wei Wei Bai released his collar and said calmly, "Take me to see him." Cici looked at her expressionless face. Did she like him, or was she glad that Gu Nanli was dead and did not have to bother her? He didn't dare to get too involved in Gu Nanli's relationship. After all, an old man's first love was really deadly when he fell in love. Wei Wei Bai was led by Cici to the outside of the intensive care unit. She saw Gu Nanli, who was covered in bandages and had a ventilator on his face. He was quiet and pale, like a corpse. Wei Wei Bai gripped the glass with her fingers. Her voice was hoarse and trembling. Did I make him like this? Cece saw that she was on the verge of collapse and was in so much pain that she wanted to die. Only then did he realize that she was in so much pain that she had calmed down. He was a man with a strong heart, but when he heard her scolding him, his heart softened. Actually, it's not really for you. Wei Wei Bai interrupted him fiercely. I want to go in. Cece paused. Could she see that something was wrong? But when he saw Wei Wei Bai's bloodshot eyes, he could almost empathize with her. He called the nurse and asked Wei Wei Bai to disinfect the wound. When Wei Wei Bai rushed into the ward, Cece looked at the glass wall speechlessly. Wei Wei Bai reached out and held Gu Nanli's hand, trembling all over. It was as if she couldn't bear the fact that Gu Nanli couldn't wake up. Cece rubbed his temples with his hands. If you're found to be pretending, your first love is over, brother. Wei Wei Bai obviously liked Gu Nanli. He couldn't bear to lie to him when he was in so much pain. Cece glanced at Wei Wei Bai's back view, as if she couldn't bear the pain, and immediately turned to leave. If he continued to watch, he would change sides. // Chapter 1477. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly. The tears in her eyes finally couldn't hold back and kept falling. She put his hand in front of her eyes and wiped away her tears. Those warm tears made Gu Nanli feel fresh. His eyelashes trembled, but he still played the role of a vegetable. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She just held his hand motionlessly and stared at him. He didn't dare to move. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything, but her tears couldn't stop falling. Tears continued to fall from his fingers, and the warmth turned cold again. She didn't say a word, but his heart ached so much that he didn't know what to do. After some time, Cece finally remembered to eat. When he returned to the ward, Wei Wei Bai was still in the same position, holding Gu Nanli's hand tightly and never leaving. Cece frowned and asked someone to send some porridge that was easy to digest. Then he entered the ward and said to Wei Wei Bai, "Eat something. If you don't eat, you'll collapse." She had just returned from a disaster and was not in good health. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She didn't even pay attention to Cece. Cece was a little embarrassed, but he still tried to persuade her. Eat something. Gu doesn't like you like this. He wants you to live happily. Wei Wei Bai's body trembled, and she almost couldn't hold Gu Nanli's hand. Cece was a little helpless that he had to lie again. He said that if you want to leave, you can. He didn't feel guilty when he said this. In fact, the truth was that Wei Wei Bai really wanted to leave. He tied her up and locked her up on the island. This ghost was so sick that he couldn't bear to look at it. Wei Wei Bai finally turned to look at him. Her expression was pale and sad. Can he still wake up? Cece coughed lightly. Yes, the doctor said that he needs the call of love. If we accompany him every day, say that we love him, and let him feel the warmth of this world, he might wake up. What the fuck is this? The level of shame was off the charts. Gu Nanli didn't even care about his old face anymore. How could he say such a thing? As expected, Wei Wei Bai was silent for 3 seconds. If it wasn't for the sadness in her eyes, he would have thought that she was about to laugh. Of course, everything was an illusion. She suddenly turned around and lowered her head to kiss his fingers. Then, she said in a hoarse voice, "Gu Nanli, I'll be your woman." This sentence was light and heavy, carrying a feeling that could not be ignored. Gu Nanli could barely control himself. His eyelids twitched. When Cece thought that he was going to be exposed, Wei Wei Bai suddenly collapsed. Gu Nanli jumped up from the bed in an instant. All the drips and breathing masks were ripped off by him with one hand. The sound of things being smashed could be heard from a ward. He had already supported Wei Wei Bai's collapsed body with one hand. Then, he sat up and took her in his arms. Wei Wei Bai had already fainted. She was so weak that it was like she was going to disappear. However, Gu Nanli's eyes were moist and his hands that were hugging her kept trembling. Her weak breathing sounded in his ears. That sentence made him so excited that he couldn't control himself. Gu Nanli never thought that he would be able to get the feeling he wanted. He was actually this excited. It was different from the feeling of weakness that he had experienced before. His heart kept beating faster and faster. So this was how the person he liked felt when she liked him? The joy after the joy made him a bit flustered. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 85. CCE couldn't help but say, "You're going to strangle her. She's very weak." Gun Namli did not say anything. He was still holding her tightly. It was like she was a precious gift that he just received. He wanted to hold on to her and not let anyone take her away. CCE had nothing to say to his childish actions. "You got the confession. Can you stop being in a vegetative state?" Gun Namli was silent for a bit before saying, "No, I still want to hear her say that she loves me every day and wants to be my woman. When I'm tired of hearing it, I'll wake up." "Cece," Gun Namli kissed her hair and whispered in her ear, "I'm also your man. In the future, I will always be." CCE and the system, it was so painful to eat this pretentious Chinibya dog food. He actually had to eat it every day. It was simply inhumane. Transmigration system. Male god, come here. 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 Chapter 1478. When Wei Wei Bai woke up again, she saw that Gun Namli was still lying upright. She put away her sad expression and began to take medicine and eat normally. Then she said, "CCE, is his career being suppressed now?" Even if Bai Mu didn't pursue anymore, the secrets he leaked were real. Gun Namli was still on the suspect list, and the police wouldn't let go of this big piece of meat. CCE was a little surprised. Some information was indeed leaked, and it also caused a competition between various forces. After all, Gun Namli's territory was too tempting. Anyone who bit off a piece of meat would be able to eat their fill. Gun Namli was busy chasing girls, and he tacitly agreed that the meat he threw out was a bargaining chip to chase Wei Wei Bai. They didn't think about fighting for it. As long as he was fine, a comeback was a matter of minutes. Wei Wei Bai nodded. She stuffed the porridge in her mouth and swallowed it expressionlessly. However, halfway through, she suddenly couldn't stand it and vomited everything. Her body couldn't stand the overly intense emotions. But she rinsed her mouth after vomiting and continued eating. Cece felt that this woman was really ruthless. She was the same kind of person as Gun Namli. They were the kind of people who were inhumane when they were ruthless to themselves. Gun Namli was also transferred from the intensive care unit to the VIP ward. Wei Wei Bai followed the doctors and nurses to take care of him. She washed his face, wiped his body, and trimmed his toenails seriously. Several times, Cece felt that Gun Namli was also a ruthless person. He was tormented and touched by his own woman, but he could still stay in a lying state. Then, Wei Wei Bai began to take revenge on those enemies who fought for Gun Namli's territory. Her methods were neat and cold. She even used her perfect weapon assembly technique to snatch a big deal from the enemy forces. She put away her nail polish and did not even wear makeup. She walked in and out of Gun Namli's sphere of influence without makeup, maintaining the balance of his career after he became a vegetable. The territories that were originally thrown out by CCE and Gun Namli as bargaining chips and had no intention of getting back were all taken back by Wei Wei Bai. Gun Namli originally wanted her to come to his side every day and say that she loved him. In the end, Wei Wei Bai went out every day to work on her career. What happened to the call of love? By the time Wei Wei Bai returned from suppressing a hostile force, it was already late at night. CCE grumbled as he followed behind her. "You don't have to work so hard. You need to rest. Otherwise, you could just give Gu a loving hug every day. Your career isn't important." Wei Wei Bai came to the bedside. Her cold and beautiful face did not have a trace of soft expression. "Very important," she said softly and earnestly. She then lowered her head and used a cotton swab to wipe Gun Namli's dry lips. It was only at this moment that her gaze became gentler. Wei Wei Bai said as she wiped his lips, "I can't let him wake up with nothing. To a man, his career is much more important than a woman." CCE was momentarily speechless. He then asked, Do you think that Gu will think that his career is more important than you? Is that why you are working so hard to protect his territory? Wei Wei Bai was silent. She wiped his lips until they were wet, and then faintly hummed in agreement. Then she said, I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to wake him up, but at least before he wakes up, I want to protect everything about him. I want to make sure that when he wakes up one day, he will still be the king of this world, and not a loser who can be trampled on by others. Gu Nanli's fingers trembled. // Chapter 1479. 10,000 words of I love you can't compare to this one sentence. I want to protect everything about him. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 88. Wei Wei Bai reached out to stroke Gu Nanli's thick black hair as her voice softened. Whether you're awake or asleep, I will always be your arm. Little husky, rest well. I will make sure you have no worries. When she said this, even Cici was moved. Women had always been their accessory. When they were rich, women were like flowers that bloomed beside them. When they failed, they would blame their failure on the woman. After all, they never needed to fight, nor did they need to bear the consequences of losing a battle. But Wei Wei Bai was not a flower. When a man failed, she could help him bear the consequences of failure and even bring him back from the ashes. After Bai Wei Wei finished speaking, she bent over and kissed his lips affectionately. Get better soon. I like you. I like you a lot. This was the call of love. When Wei Wei Bai was about to leave, a hand suddenly pressed down on her hair and her lips were pressed onto his again. A lingering kiss made Wei Wei Bai's eyes open wide. Gu Nanli's eyelashes trembled a few times before he finally opened his eyes. His eyes were a bit scattered, but there was a trace of joy in them. After he finished kissing her, he finally let her go and said in a soft voice, I heard it. You can't deny it. After saying this, he couldn't help smiling. He had a proud smile. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 90. Wei Wei Bai stared at him in a daze, as if she couldn't believe it. You're awake. Gu Nanli pretended to reluctantly raise his hand, wanting to hold her hand, but he couldn't do it after trying a few times. Wei Wei Bai grabbed his hand. This initiative made Gu Nanli narrow his eyes in satisfaction. He said softly, You said you liked me, so I woke up. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a while. Suddenly, she blinked and the tears in her eyes fell onto his arm. It was as if the tears that she had been holding back for a long time fell, but she quickly wiped them away with her hands and then smiled as if nothing had happened. It's good that you're awake. I thought you would be in a vegetative state forever. Gu Nanli looked at her silently. His expression was complicated, but in the end, it was more of a warm joy. He sighed. Yes, I was woken up by you. His mental defenses were completely shattered. After walking on a dark path for so long, a light suddenly appeared. He was so scared that he didn't dare to look at it directly. At first, he could only lean on her to sleep, but now she had become the pillar of support in his heart. The pain that Gu Buda had inflicted upon him was slowly alleviated by her. Gu Nanli felt that life was as funny as a drama, and he was grateful for this funny thing that allowed her to appear in his life. The resentment that was deeply hidden in his heart dissipated little by little. When he first saw her, it would be a lie to say that he didn't hate her. It was only because he was used to holding it in that he suppressed it in his heart. Now, there was no more hate. Gu Nanli held her hand and kissed her fingertips. I'll help you apply nail polish in the future, he said softly. This man who was once like a wild beast full of murderous intent was actually so soft. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled a few times. Her smile deepened, and her voice was slightly choked. Okay. Cici felt that this scene was too glaring. He turned around and wiped the corners of his eyes. He didn't think that a person with a heart of stone like him would be moved. The system held the cup expressionlessly and snorted coldly. It's all fake. It had been through so many worlds and it was no longer moved. Whoever was moved was an idiot. / Chapter 1480. Gu Nanli was so moved by Wei Wei Bai's confession that he didn't even pretend to be in a vegetative state anymore. So he pretended to be disabled. When the doctor said, Mr. Gu's leg suffered a serious gunshot wound. Without long-term rehabilitation, he won't be able to stand up. I hope Miss Bai can give him encouragement of love and give him the courage to stand up. Cece stared at the doctor's lies, dumbfounded. How shameless must one be to say such words of encouragement of love? Moreover, his leg suffered a gunshot wound, but the wound was very controlled. The most troublesome part of the wound was that it had been soaked in seawater for too long. But to say that he couldn't stand up was bullshit. If he didn't take good care of it, it was possible that he would suffer from rheumatism and bone pain in the future. Disability was impossible. Gu Nanli was good at pretending. He reached out and touched his injured leg indifferently, then said calmly, "I didn't think that I would have a day like this." A faint sigh and sadness were suppressed deep in his eyes, making his calmness seem more desperate. Cece and the system laughed, "Haha. Yes, I didn't think that you would be so despicable one day." Wei Wei Bai frowned and suddenly reached out to hold his fingers, saying worriedly, "Don't worry, I'll help you with your rehabilitation training. I believe that you can stand up." Gu Nanli's eyes flashed with a glimmer of success, but he quickly covered it up. Instead, there was a layer of haggard gloominess. For a moment, he looked very pitiful. Wei Wei Bai hugged him and stroked his face as if she was petting a child. "It's okay, baby. Even if you're crippled, I won't leave you behind." Gu Nanli didn't want more than this. Her exposed feelings and confession soothed the dark insecurities in his heart time and time again. He didn't think that one day he would like such an obvious and passionate expression of her feelings. Gu Nanli sighed faintly. "I only have you left." Wei Wei Bai's expression turned gentle. Her strong and sharp side melted into water. She was so beautiful that it made people gasp in admiration. Cece really wanted to shout, "Fake, don't believe it." He felt as if he was watching a pretty girl being cheated away by the underworld, and he actually felt guilty. For the next half a month, Wei Wei Bai dealt with the enemy forces while helping Gu Nanli rebuild. Gu Nanli often fell in various ways to win her sympathy. Just as they were getting along happily with each other, their favorability towards each other tenaciously and slowly increased. Half a month later, it increased to 93 favorability points. As for Gu Nanli, he was addicted to pretending to be a disabled person and had no intention of pulling himself together. In the end, even Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand it anymore. "Why don't I hire an assassin to shoot him in the legs and cripple him for real?" Since he was so good at acting, she really wanted to flatten him into a container and let him act as much as he wanted. The system sighed, calm down. "If you're already impatient now, what if you want to spend the rest of your life with him?" Wei Wei Bai said, "What do you mean by spend the rest of your life with him? Once the strategy is done, let's go." Who would spend the rest of their life with him? The strategy targets were all fucking difficult to deal with. Their personalities were all problematic. If it wasn't for the favorability points for the life points and for living, who would spend the rest of their lives with these crazy people? After completing the side mission and the strategy, she had a lot of free time left. It was not good to play freely. Looking at Gu Nanli every day, she would feel like she was looking at missions every day. So after completing the mission, she would break up with Gu Nanli and say goodbye. The system was silent for a long time. It really wanted to say something, but felt that there was nothing to say. /the is at https://m sashu.com/. Chapter 1481. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life with him. The host had never seen the ability of a real lucky person. In this plane, no matter where she escaped, she couldn't escape from Gu Nanli. Even it couldn't help her avoid Gu Nanli. What a miserable life. The system pretended to wipe a few drops of crocodile tears and continued to drink the orange juice. It hoped that its orange juice could last a lifetime. Otherwise, it really didn't have any other snacks. Gu Nanli stayed in the hospital for half a month. He felt that if this continued, he would be exposed. After all, Wei Wei Bai had been asking the doctor for detailed medical records. The doctor had made several versions of the medical records, although he could fool Wei Wei Bai for a while. But who knew when they would notice that something was wrong? So Gu Nanli was directly discharged from the hospital and sat in a wheelchair. In this half a month, Wei Wei Bai didn't really leave his side except to deal with some important matters. She asked about his well-being, massaged him, held his hand, and patiently let him walk forward step by step. Sometimes, when he saw how tired she was, his heart ached. But those unloved childhood times were gradually made up for by her patient companionship during this period of time. He had never been so clear about what he wanted. It wasn't the excitement of meeting an opponent. It wasn't the law of the jungle, the arrogance of the strong being king. Instead, he truly enjoyed the kind of satisfaction that only the weak could enjoy. Gu Nanli was paralyzed in the wheelchair. He was wearing a phone earpiece and was contacting his subordinates. Bai Mu is actually not dead. He repeated indifferently, but he wasn't too angry. Then he said calmly, "Then send assassins to assassinate him. One is not enough. Send 10. I can still afford this bit of hiring fee." If it wasn't for Wei Wei Bai, he didn't want to take Bai Mu's life. After all, after Bai Qi died, he and Bai Mu were the only biological brothers left in this world. He was cold-blooded by nature and wouldn't deliberately find trouble with his family. However, this relative of his was too inconsiderate. He had no choice but to hack him to death. When Gu Nanli thought of Wei Wei Bai's past, his eyes turned cold. She would not find out. Neither would they find out how Gu Buda had died back then. Bai Qi had killed him. However, when Gu Buda wanted to murder Wei Wei Bai and her daughter, he was the one who leaked the crucial information. He was young and looked especially innocent and harmless when he was young. No one saw the killing intent in his eyes. He hated the Gu family so much that he wanted to perish together with them. Even when he heard that his own mother had been killed by Gu Buda, he didn't feel anything at all. No, there were ripples. It was resentment. Resentment for why they hadn't realized after so many years that he was their real child. He doted on Wei Wei Bai like a treasure. However, he had turned into trash in the swamp. His body was covered in dark scars as he struggled to climb up from the bottom. After crawling for so long, he finally saw the light of dawn. And this light was actually given to him by the child he hated. The balcony door suddenly opened. The coldness and murderous intent in Gu Nanli's eyes disappeared instantly. He looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai holding a bowl of tonic medicine. She looked at him disapprovingly and said, "Why are you standing on the balcony? What if your wound hurts again? Drink the medicine first to nourish your body." She carefully picked up the spoon and sat by the side to feed him mouthful by mouthful. Gu Nanli also acted like he was paralyzed. He opened his mouth and drank, without any of the dignity of a strong person. Slash. Chapter 1482. It was as if overnight he had turned from a perverted murderer into a mentally retarded baby that needed to be coaxed. After drinking the medicine, she pushed him into the room. Then, she found a small pair of scissors and cut his nails. When she lowered her head and cut his nails gently, her posture was indescribably gentle and beautiful. Gu Nanli's eyes were greedy for this beauty. He gently placed his hand on her thin shoulder. His fingers touched her round shoulder and felt the warmth of her body. Gu Nanli suddenly said softly, "That's good too." It was good that he had fallen into the underworld. If they had not exchanged, she might not have grown into the girl he liked. Fortunately, she did not have his experience, so her heart was softer and easier to fool than him. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. "What's wrong?" Gu Nanli shook his head and looked for an opportunity to hold her hand. He saw the white nails on it. "Why don't you apply nail polish?" Wei Wei Bai said casually. "You're a patient. How can I use nail polish to take care of you?" Gu Nanli's fingers paused, as if he was a little surprised by her answer. Wei Wei Bai smiled naturally. "When you're better, you'll apply it for me personally." Gu Nanli did not know why, but when he saw her bright smile, his eyes became bitter. His smile was a little forced. "Okay, wait for me to get better." He had never been treated so gently and attentively. He actually wanted to maintain it greedily. But when he saw the shadow of fatigue under her eyes, he suddenly felt that his heart was very vicious. Wei Wei Bai finished trimming his nails and washed his hands. Then, she took out the documents that needed to be dealt with. "These are difficult to deal with. Take a look yourself." Gu Nanli opened it leisurely and took the fountain pen. Then he smiled. The forces in this territory are very complicated. You need to get through these connections. It's useless to just snatch them back. You also need to get the pass from the forces above. His voice was very clear, and he spoke at a moderate pace. He told her everything she should pay attention to. Bai Weiwei leaned against him, extremely well-behaved. The sun gradually rose, and the warm sunlight spread all over the ground. Gu Nanli suddenly felt that he should find some time to stand up. He wanted to be like this forever. Happiness once again welled up in his heart, unfamiliar and lasting. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. Her favorable impression of him was at 95, but Weiwei Bai was in a difficult situation. She had almost forgotten about the side mission. Weiwei Bai asked again, Bai Qi doesn't have hundreds of illegitimate children, does he? The system glanced at the notification and realized that it could speak now. No, just Bai Mu. Weiwei Bai said, Are you sure? You said that Bai Qi didn't cheat on you. The system said he really didn't cheat. He had Bai Mu by accident before he got married, and he never cheated after he got married. Something flashed through Weiwei Bai's mind. So many things had happened recently that he had forgotten to sort out his relationship with Gu Nanli. What did he say in the beginning? Bai Qi and his wife did not cheat on him, but she was not related to Gu Nanli by blood. Gu Nanli was related to Bai Mu by blood. Weiwei Bai thought about it and suddenly asked curiously, Am I adopted? Even if he didn't cheat, he could still be adopted. The system said, Maybe, who knows? This answer was very high-end. She couldn't tell if it was true or not. Weiwei Bai tried to say, There are two possibilities. I'll guess with whether I'm adopted or not. Download the at https://m sashu.com// to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click Save at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1483. When the favorability reaches 100, the side mission must be completed together. Otherwise, she will be paralyzed for the rest of her life. Just the thought of such torture made her tremble. That old thief, the main system, was too evil. The system became pessimistic. Every side mission requires guessing. It's impossible to guess correctly every time. Weiwei Bai touched Tongzi's head. If I'm adopted, then Gu Nanli's identity is like this. When he was born, Bai Qi was chased by his enemies and accidentally threw him away. Later on, he adopted me as his own to fulfill his wish of missing his biological son. The system said no. Weiwei Bai nodded. Then if I'm not adopted, but I'm not related to anyone in the Bai family, then Gu Nanli and I might have been swapped. The system said no. It was not swapped, it was swapped maliciously. If her guess was not deep enough, she would not be able to complete the mission. Weiwei Bai frowned and pondered. All kinds of possibilities ran through her mind. It was too difficult to just guess. After all, it did not say how much detailed information was needed to complete the mission. If she did not grasp this well, she would be paralyzed for life. If it was not swapped, then it was suddenly a servant knocked on the door and asked softly, Miss Bai? Weiwei Bai woke up from her guess, and her expression turned cold. What's the matter? It was rare for Gu Nanli to be pushed out by CCE. It seemed that Gu Nanli's birthday was coming soon. CCE took the initiative to give him a grand birthday party and insisted that Gu Nanli accompany him to look at the cake design. The servant said, You're on the phone. Weiwei Bai had been helping Gu Nanli with his affairs recently and also paid attention to the fate of the Bai family who were locked up. She found that everyone was doing well in prison, so she did not continue to investigate. She took the phone. It was Bai Mu. Weiwei. Bai Mu's voice was hoarse and weak. It seemed that he had not yet recovered from the gunshot wound. Weiwei Bai frowned. What? What else do you want to threaten me with? Big brother. The word brother was spoken rather maliciously. After an indeterminate period of time, Bai Mu smiled bitterly. You don't need to call me big brother. You might not believe what I'm about to say, but I'll tell you anyway. Weiwei Bai said, Stop nagging. I'm hanging up. Bai Mu's voice grew anxious. You're Gu Buda's daughter. Weiwei Bai was stunned and her mouth twitched. She was Gu Buda's daughter. Gu Nanli was Bai Qi's son. Wait a minute. Didn't they say that they were mistaken? Then, how did they exchange their identities? Bai Qi was afraid that she would not believe him. When you were hospitalized, I took your blood for a test. When I woke up a few days ago, I saw the report and found that you are not related to me by blood. Bai Mu heaved a sigh of relief. Yes, we're not siblings, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai said. Even if we're not siblings, how do you know that I'm Gu Buda's daughter? Bai Mu said, Gu Buda was caught a few times. Although he was only locked up for a short period of time, some of his information was left behind. His fingernails and hair were saved in the database. I checked it and found that you're 99% related. He said, I suspect that you and Gu Nanli were swapped by Gu Buda back then. When Bai Qi was being hunted down, the person beside Bai Qi's wife was Gu Buda. Gu Buda also had a pregnant wife. You couldn't have been swapped because the genders are different. When there were only 2 children, it was impossible for the 2 genders to be swapped. Wei Wei Bai's face was calm. She complained to the system. After talking for so long, you're just talking about the old joke of swapping a leopard cat for a prince. No matter how trash the system is, it's still a high-end artificial intelligence. It can't use such a simple and stupid joke. She had actually thought about swapping a leopard cat for a prince, but it was too melodramatic and cliché. She didn't think it was possible, so she didn't think too much about it. Gu Nanli's background might have a scarier, deeper, and more profound secret waiting for her to find out. Congratulations, host, for completing the mystery of swapping a leopard cat for a prince. It was a simple and clear sentence without any pause. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Main system, you shameless old thing. You're so bad that I can't even look at it anymore. How can you use such a melodramatic old trick? Are you worthy of being a high-intelligence artificial intelligence? Bai Mu was still talking about his speculations. Wei Wei Bai quietly hung up the phone. She finally completed this annoying side mission. She heard movement and looked up at the door. She saw Gu Nanli pushing his wheelchair in. Gu Nanli saw her burning gaze on him, and his eyes couldn't help but curve. After the dark aura was retracted, his delicate and harmless appearance made people feel youthful. What's wrong? Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while, then smiled. Nothing, I just miss you. Gu Nanli was stunned. He couldn't help but smile even wider. Wei Wei Bai was also smiling. That was great. She could freely say goodbye to him after brushing up on him. // Chapter 1484. Just like that, the days passed unhurriedly without any disturbances. Wei Wei Bai and Gu Nanli's life was sweet and peaceful. Gu Nanli's birthday was coming, and Cici made it very grand for him. Gu Nanli didn't refuse. A birthday party was a good gathering for all the forces to communicate. The news of his disability had already spread throughout the underworld. But even if his legs were disabled, his image didn't fall much because Gu Nanli didn't rely on fighting and killing to form his power. He was powerful because of his snake-like brain, not because of his skills. On the day of the party, Cici flipped through a pile of documents. There were many guests, so strict checks were needed to prevent bad enemies from sneaking in. Gu Nanli leisurely ran to the place where Wei Wei Bai was changing and waited. There were maids helping. He sat in the wheelchair, his fingers supporting his cheeks casually, smiling as he watched Wei Wei Bai put on a beautiful long dress. Her back was facing him, and there were many ribbons behind her. The maid squatted down and tied beautiful knots for her. Gu Nanli slowly came behind her and waved his hand to ask the maid to leave. Then he lowered his head and seriously tied the rest of the ribbons. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have noticed him. She turned slightly, and her beautiful side profile was still stunning under the light. Gu Nanli said softly, "Done tying. Women's things are so troublesome." He wore a suit and at most a tie and cufflinks. But she had a few maids to help her get dressed, so she needed more time than him. Wei Wei Bai glared at him unhappily. Troublesome? Don't be a woman if you have the guts. Gu Nanli immediately reached out and hugged her waist, leaning his face against her back. Okay, don't be angry. It's all my fault. I'll help you paint your nails." His words were full of smiles. He was so easygoing and gentle that those who knew him felt that he was possessed by something. Wei Wei Bai didn't blame him. She turned around and sat down. Her dress spun around beautifully. Then, she stretched out her incomparably white fingers, her posture casual and arrogant. Then I'll have to trouble you, baby. Gu Nanli was very tolerant of the fact that she was always talking about her precious husky. He even felt that it was very intimate. The husky she had bought was raised by Bai Mu. Later on, when the Bai family was arrested and imprisoned, that husky relied on the Bai family's kitchen to survive and didn't starve to death. When Wei Wei Bai went to the Bai family, she brought it back and let it jump around again. She liked the dog very much and often bathed it. She thought of the silly dog scratching the sofa outside. Gu Nanli's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. He was going to make it into a hot pot someday. Holding Wei Wei Bai's hand, he skillfully painted her nails. The beautiful light pink nail polish was the color of cherry blossoms. Gu Nanli also began to recognize a bunch of nail polishes of similar colors. Now, he could even count dozens of cosmetics and skincare products on Wei Wei Bai's dressing table. Although he still couldn't understand why her face was fine with so many things applied to it. She looked the best without makeup. Of course, she also looked good when she wore lipstick, especially when he kissed her. A hint of twisted greed appeared in Gu Nanli's eyes. He enjoyed the warmth of this moment, so he silently suppressed his dark possessiveness. He wanted to let her fly and let her be happy, just like how she was making him so happy now. Cici came over and saw his brother looking at Wei Wei Bai like a fawning dog. Chapter 1485. On the other hand, Wei Wei Bai looked indifferent. She looked at Gu Nanli with an indescribable calmness. Cici blinked and found that Wei Wei Bai's eyes had become unusually gentle. He was probably mistaken about the calmness just now. Cici didn't think much of it and said to Gu Nanli, "Birthday boy, you have to go out and deal with the guests." Gu Nanli held Wei Wei Bai's hand and kissed the back of her hand. "I'll go first. I'll wait for you." Wei Wei Bai raised her hand to touch his chin and kissed his lips. Then her lips moved slightly, and she said in a low voice, "I'll give you the present later. Happy birthday." Gu Nanli's eyes moved. He leaned back in his wheelchair happily and said, "Okay, I'll wait for you." Then he pushed the wheelchair out. Cici came over to help push it. When they were out of the room and far enough away, Cici finally couldn't help but ask, "What do you mean by recover?" Gu Nanli returned to his usual cold self after leaving the room. He reached out his finger and touched his lips. After a long silence, he said, "These 2 days. After all, I've endured for long enough." Although he could get her pity and love when he was a cripple, but he couldn't take her to bed. It was too unbearable. Gu Nanli felt that his self-control was not enough in front of Wei Wei Bai. Cici felt that Gu Nanli's tone was like a big bad wolf, but he was used to his personality. Anyway, from the first day he met him, he knew that this guy was bad. He just didn't expect that he could be so despicable when chasing a girl. If Wei Wei Bai knew that he had used so many tricks, she would probably have the heart to kill him. Of course, Cici saw Gu Nanli as a brother, so he could only let Wei Wei Bai down and bury these tricks. Let them be happy for a lifetime. The birthday banquet was very grand. When the banquet started, Gu Nanli went up to propose a toast and then said the opening lines. Everyone applauded enthusiastically, although the birthday party couldn't come up with anything new. However, it was still useful for communicating with the various powers. It was just that many things were very cumbersome, and Gu Nanli was not willing to tire Wei Wei Bai out. When they were cutting the cake, Wei Wei Bai slowly came down the stairs. Gu Nanli threw the knife into Cici's arms and pushed his wheelchair to the bottom of the stairs. He looked up and saw her slowly walking down the stairs. Her skirt was flowing elegantly, and her short hair had already grown to her shoulders. Her slightly curly hair fluttered in the wind. When Wei Wei Bai came down from upstairs, Gu Nanli was already holding her fingers. Then, he turned to the side and said to everyone, "My wife, Wei Wei Bai." Everyone at the scene was in an uproar as they looked at Wei Wei Bai. Those who had thought that Wei Wei Bai was just Gu Nanli's mistress looked at Wei Wei Bai strangely. But when they thought about how Wei Wei Bai had personally come out to stabilize the situation when Gu Nanli was lying in the hospital, they thought about it. This kind of ability was indeed worthy of Gun Nanli. Coincidentally, when the music started to play, Cece specially invited a small symphony orchestra for this banquet. Gun Nanli held Wei Wei Bai's hand tightly. "May I have the honor to dance with you?" Wei Wei Bai held his fingers back. "Of course, it's my honor." Gun Nanli had not danced with anyone for so many years. At every banquet, he was very cold and restrained, rarely participating in double activities. So when Wei Wei Bai held his hand and the two of them walked to the middle of the living room in a wheelchair, one of them stood and one of them sat in a wheelchair. // Chapter 1486. The guests couldn't help but take a few more glances. The two of them were like natural luminaries. Whether it was their appearance or aura, they complemented each other. In the music, Gun Nanli slowly moved his wheelchair, and Wei Wei Bai slowly matched his rhythm. In the rhythm of the music, the two of them had a surprisingly good rhythm. They were calm and elegant. Wei Wei Bai moved unhurriedly and complained softly, "When did we get married? Wife." When he said this, Gun Nanli didn't even frown when he was lying. Gun Nanli grabbed her fingertips and pulled her naturally. His wrist was very strong. Bai Weiwei was wearing high heels. She staggered for a moment, and her whole body was pulled over by him. Gun Nanli changed his direction and hugged her. Weiwei Bai had no choice but to sit on his lap. Gun Nanli also pushed the wheelchair, and the two of them sat in the wheelchair. He smiled. "Then I'll propose now. Are you willing to marry me, Wei Wei?" Wei Wei Bai hesitated. Gun Nanli said calmly, "If you don't agree, I won't let go. You can only sit in the wheelchair for the whole night." The two of them sat in the wheelchair together for everyone to see. "Wei Wei Bai, you're a rascal." "Gun Nanli, that's too modest. I'm more than just a rascal." With that said, he touched her finger. A simple but beautiful ring with a smooth design had been put on her ring finger. After Gun Nanli put the ring on, he held her hand tightly. "Okay, now that the proposal is over, let's hurry into the wedding hall." Wei Wei Bai wanted to withdraw her hand, but Gun Nanli refused to let go. From the looks of it, he wouldn't give up until he got what he wanted. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but mutter, "You're practically stealing the bride." Gun Nanli's tone deepened. "If I really want to steal the bride, I wouldn't be so gentle." Wei Wei Bai struggled to break free from his hand and stood up from the wheelchair. She then smoothed out her skirt and said, "You're still so childish at your age. I'll go upstairs first. When you're done with your business, remember to come back to your room. I'll give you a birthday present." After that, Wei Wei Bai turned around and walked upstairs. Gun Nanli could not help but confirm. "So my proposal was successful." Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. She placed one hand on the armrest and turned around with a bright smile. Her bright eyes, white teeth, and red lips were like fire. "Yes, Mr. Gu, you've succeeded." After that, she smiled and walked upstairs. Soon, her figure disappeared around the corner of the stairs. Gun Nanli stared blankly at the spot where she had disappeared for a few seconds before he suddenly realized that his palms were sweaty. Gun Nanli slowly let out a sigh of relief. He was so nervous just now. He could no longer suppress the joy in his heart from the proposal being successful. He really wanted to get up from the wheelchair and run upstairs to hug Wei Wei Bai. The satisfaction of getting what he wanted was different from any other successful project in the past. If something was successful, he would at most feel a little better. But if the proposal was successful, he would feel real happiness. He never thought that one day he would be able to use the word happiness to describe himself. Gun Nanli's calm expression could not help but soften. He pursed his lips into a smile. He suddenly felt that this year's birthday was the most successful birthday party in his life. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 97. When Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of favorability, she had already started to pick out her clothes. The system asked, "Are you going to sleep? Are you choosing your pajamas?" It was rare for Wei Wei Bai to want to sleep so early. Wei Wei Bai picked up a black dress. "This one is leaking." /to to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the save button below to record this reading. Where's system? Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1487. The system couldn't help but say, "If you wear this kind of pajamas, I'll be blocked immediately." Wei Wei Bai smiled. "Then I'll wear this." The system looked at the dress in her hand. No matter how it looked at it, it looked like something sexy. "What are you doing?" Wei Wei Bai began to untie the ribbon behind her dress. "Sleeping." The system felt that the host was hinting at something when she said the word sleep. Then it saw an army of bullet comments surrounding it. The system was very calm. After all, the host was just changing clothes, and the indifference would quickly disappear. But this wait seemed to have lasted for a long time. Did the host need a whole night to change clothes? As the host of the banquet, although Gu Nanli tried his best to shorten the time, it was already late at night by the time he sent all the guests away. He thought of Wei Wei Bai's gift and immediately pushed his wheelchair to the stairs. Because he was in a hurry, he was too lazy to pretend. He directly got off the wheelchair and ran up the stairs with it. Then he sat on the wheelchair again on the second floor and pretended to be a disabled person to the front of the room. He reached out and pushed the door open. In fact, he didn't expect anything. After all, it was late at night, and she was probably asleep. The gift would probably be on the table. Wei Wei Bai casually threw her lipstick to him as a gift, and Gu Nanli felt that it was not bad. After he opened the door, he felt a cool breeze. The balcony's floor-to-ceiling windows were open. The moonlight shone in, and the floor was bathed in white moonlight. Gu Nanli leaned against by Wei Wei on the balcony. She slowly turned her head. Her red mole was gorgeous, and the moonlight shone on her body. Her close-fitting black backless dress, with her movements, revealed her beautiful figure. Gu Nanli's pupils shrank. He didn't expect to see this. This dress was more stimulating than not wearing it. Wei Wei Bai held a cigarette in her hand and looked at him lazily. "Mr. Gu, do you like it?" She slowly straightened her body. The dress was like a second layer of skin. Under her round shoulders and delicate collarbones was a horizontal black collar. The contrast between black and white was breathtaking. This kind of clothing could almost be considered a sexy black outfit. The balcony was relatively dark. When Bai Weiwei walked in step by step from the balcony, under the light. Only then did Gu Nanli see clearly that she was wearing black fishnet stockings. This was simply driving a man crazy. Gu Nanli gripped the armrest of his wheelchair so hard that the veins on the back of his hand bulged. Wei Wei Bai finally walked in front of him and bent over lazily. Her beautiful skin was even more eye-catching in his eyes. She said indifferently, "Are you satisfied with what you see?" Gu Nanli suddenly reached out and snatched the cigarette from her hand. "Don't smoke this thing." He could tolerate cosmetics, but not smoking. "This thing is really bad for the body." Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she saw Gu Nanli put out the cigarette on the table. A living person like her was tempting him. He had a bone to pick with the pipe. Was there something wrong with this guy's brain? There was nothing wrong with Gu Nanli. That's the big problem. Just one look at Wei Wei Bai, and his body was so hot that it was about to explode. Her current state was already beyond his tolerance. But he was pretending to be disabled now. If he recovered immediately, it would be strange if Wei Wei Bai didn't suspect anything. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai's hand slowly touched his thigh. Her voice was incomparably calm. "Mr. Gu, may I have the honor to invite you for a dance?" Gu Nanli's mind was blank. His words were a little slow. "What dance?" Wei Wei Bai suddenly sat on his thigh. She reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck. She slowly blew a breath of warm air on his neck. "You can have whatever dance you want. After all, this is a gift for you." Wei Wei Bai's anger made him completely lose his mind. How could someone be so good at seducing men? She was a 10,000-year-old vixen and a damn nine-tailed fox. The kind that brought disaster to the country the moment she was born. Gu Nanli suddenly grabbed her waist and stood up directly to walk to the bed. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at him. Her eyes were a little wide, and the seductive look just now was gone. Gu Nanli's mood improved. He didn't feel guilty at all for lying. He kissed her. "You think that I can't stand up, so you're planning to suffocate me to death, right?" She was dressed like this and sat on him so boldly. She even gave herself to him as a gift. Wasn't it because she knew that he couldn't stand up and couldn't do whatever he wanted to her? Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. "You're not disabled?" Gu Nanli pressed her onto the bed and held her face. If you like my disabled appearance, I'll continue to be disabled for you to see tomorrow. Now take pity on me and let me consummate our marriage first. Okay? Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely for a while. She suddenly realized and pushed him fiercely. Gu Nanli, you shameless scoundrel. You're obviously not disabled, but you're lying to me. Gu Nanli took the opportunity to kiss her and refused to let go. I'm really disabled. You're making me stand up miraculously because of your love. Wei Wei Bai flew into a rage out of humiliation. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? Gu Nanli took the opportunity to pull the blanket over and trap the two of them. He clasped her hand. His forehead was covered in sweat, and it slid down his handsome face. He kissed her gently. Thank you. I like this gift very much. Wei Wei Bai's face turned red. The two of them were clearly people who would tremble in the underworld with a stomp of their feet, but at this moment, they were looking at each other like two big children. Then slowly, Gu Nanli hugged her, and the favorability also increased. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 99. / QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 1488. In the endless darkness, there was a place that was warm and bright. No matter how many nightmares were chasing after him, he still ran forward with all his might. It was not like before, where he could not resist at all. Just as those terrifying dark shadows were about to catch up to him, he fell, just as he thought he was going to fall into the swamp again. A warm hand held his hand, pulling him out of the endless darkness. He looked up and saw a familiar figure pulling him along as they ran forward. The swamp was gone, the maze was gone, the darkness was gone. The pain and nightmares were all far away. His weak and small body had also grown up. He was strong and fearless, and the shadow of incomparable weakness in his heart had been dispelled by her. Gu Nanli looked at the person pulling him towards the light and gently called out, Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai turned around and revealed a cute smile to him. Mr. Gu, good night. A simple good night, letting him know that he would not suffer from any nightmares in the future. Gu Nanli couldn't help but whisper back, good night. Then he woke up, his eyes incomparably bright. Wei Wei Bai was still in his arms, sleeping peacefully. The sun was shining outside the window. He couldn't help but call her a few times in her ear. Wei Wei Bai frowned, as if she was dissatisfied that her sleep was disturbed. She half opened her eyes and complained, What's wrong? Are you being chased again? Gu Nanli kissed her eyes and whispered with a smile, It's nothing. You can continue sleeping. I just want to call you and let you feel my joy. Wei Wei Bai was tired to death. She was too lazy to care about this crazy person, so she closed her eyes and continued to sleep. While she was asleep, a prompt sounded from the affection level. Ding, the male lead's affection is at 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the mission. Leaving countdown. None. 30 minutes. None. Manually leaving the world failed. If the male lead does not leave, the host cannot leave. Wei Wei Bai did not hear any of this. Behind the bullet screen army, when the system heard the favorability level of 100, it manually activated the function to leave. Of course, he failed. The system looked at the data that couldn't be left with a cold expression. Applying for a lifetime was just a joke. It was impossible for them to succeed. After all, their levels were not high enough. But under Yi Yuxuan's ferocious and terrifying wish, the impossible request still succeeded. As for applying for a lifetime strategy, the initiative should be in the hands of the host. Generally speaking, if the host wanted to stay in the plane for the rest of his life, it was fine. But if she wanted to leave early, it would be even better. There was a choice. Only Wei Wei Bai's application did not give her the option to leave. Motherfucker, Yi Yuxuan, that bastard. Even if she died, she still wanted to keep Wei Wei Bai by her side for the rest of her life. Even in this plane, his terrifying wish was like an earthbound spirit that could affect Wei Wei Bai's fate. He had robbed too much of his HP. Now he could affect Wei Wei Bai's fate even more. The system glanced at the fate roulette and saw the slight traces left by Yi Yuxuan. Even if it was just a little, it was enough to shock the system. The system looked at the emotion blocker with a bitter expression. This thing, It did not know if it could persist for a lifetime to remove Wei Wei Bai's emotions. It was afraid that if it wasted too much time, it would go on strike. Please don't go on strike. The system took out the repair box and guarded beside the emotion blocker. As long as a trace of Wei Wei Bai's emotions leaked out, it would capture it and stuff it back in. Slash. Chapter 1489. Host, you have to work hard. Men are not good people. Don't get too emotional. Otherwise, it would die of exhaustion. Before it died of exhaustion, it would drink a mouthful of orange juice to calm down. Wei Wei Bai was also exhausted. She was so tired that she couldn't even lift her limbs. Her skin was covered in the marks left by Gun Nanli. Those mottled marks would not fade for a few days. Gun Nanli, on the other hand, was very energetic. He continued to sit in the wheelchair. When she saw him shamelessly pushing the wheelchair beside her and asking her to get up for dinner, Wei Wei Bai was furious. She lifted her leg and kicked his wheelchair away. Because it had wheels, the wheelchair slid a short distance away. She didn't have enough strength to kick it far. Gun Nanli wasn't angry. Instead, he looked down at her feet that were sticking out from under the blanket. There were traces of him strangling her fair ankles. When she wanted to crawl away, he reached out and grabbed her ankles to drag her back. Gun Nanli's eyes darkened. He couldn't help but touch his lips as if he was thinking about something. Wei Wei Bai quickly retracted her legs and covered herself with the blanket. Get lost. Gun Nanli was afraid that he couldn't control himself, so he pushed the wheelchair away again. CCE ran over to help him push the wheelchair. Didn't you expose yourself? Why are you still in the wheelchair? Gun Nanli's smile became a little gloomy. Don't you have a bunch of bad things to do at home? I'm pretending to be weak so that I can help you arrange the path to the top. CCE trembled. Okay. You could be more nimble. Don't torture those poor people. His military advisor was good at everything, but his methods of torturing people were especially cruel. He was worried that his poor brother wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Gun Nanli supported his chin with one hand and said lazily, I'm in a good mood. I'll accumulate blessings for Wei Wei. I won't deliberately torture others. He would simply and neatly defeat them, cutting the weeds and removing the roots to eliminate future troubles. He no longer needed to be as cruel and violent as before because of insomnia. He could only comfort himself with more exciting and bloody scenes. CCE's expression softened. He suddenly felt that Gun Nanli was truly blessed to be able to obtain the love he wanted. In the room, Wei Wei Bai had already started to pack her things. I don't think we can stay in Gun Nanli's territory anymore. Originally, we wanted to cleanse the Bai family, but the crazy Bai Mu imprisoned all the Bai family members. We had no choice but to go abroad to lie low. Although a lifetime was a very long time. That way, she wouldn't have to worry about the time. However, after completing the strategy, he realized that it was troublesome to take too long. As Wei Wei Bai was packing, she suddenly said, Tongzi, we can only rely on each other for the rest of our lives. The system said, don't worry, your life will be very interesting. Gun Nanli will follow you like a spirit behind your back for the rest of your life. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and became happy. That's true. Traveling around the world, eating good food, seeing beautiful women, experiencing all kinds of different leisurely lives. It will be very interesting. System, are you sure you're not running away? Wei Wei Bai grabbed a bunch of jewelry. Don't worry about Gun Nanli. I'll hide abroad and keep a low profile. Who the hell knows where I'm going? No matter how powerful he is, he won't be able to find me among billions of people. It was not easy to find someone who was hiding abroad and running around. The world was so big, many people would encounter something that they wouldn't encounter in their lifetime. Therefore, as long as she left, the possibility of meeting Gun Nanli in her lifetime was close to zero. This was not a novel where they could meet just because they wanted to. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, / crossover system, Adonis, come here, / crossover system, Adonis, come here. Download crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, comma, Chapter 1490. The system did not dare to say anything. Once they reached the 100th level, fate would stick to them like a sticky plaster. It was almost impossible for Wei Wei Bai to easily avoid Gun Nanli. But maybe Bai Weiwei's dogshit luck was good, and she really wouldn't meet him in this lifetime. Wei Wei Bai put all the gold, silver, and jewelry into a box. She only had 1 or 2 sets of clothes to change into and did not bring anything else. After all, money was the king. Now was the best time to leave because Gun Nanli trusted her the most. She could go wherever she wanted. After packing, she suddenly paused and thought, "To end everything once and for all, I'll die, okay?" The system said, "I don't want to die." Wei Wei Bai planned for a while. It's better to die. Otherwise, it won't be good to keep thinking about Gun Nanli. Although she felt that love was a thing, even if it was 100 points of affection, after a few years, the beautiful feeling of dopamine would be gone, and love would be cold. Gun Nanli would definitely forget about her. But these few years would still be very troublesome, so playing dead was a good idea. Wei Wei Bai took out her phone and called Bai Mu. Bai Mu picked up almost immediately. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Do you want to meet?" Bai Mu was speechless. Wei Wei Bai said, "I want to ask about my parents. Do you have a yacht? Let's go up and talk." Although it was very sudden, Bai Mu's tone was still excited. "Okay, I do." "When?" Wei Wei Bai wanted to end this quickly. "In the afternoon. I'm free in the afternoon. Give me the address, and I'll go over." Bai Mu immediately told her the location of a port. Bai Weiwei hummed it in and bluntly hung up. Bai Mu looked at his phone in a daze. Then he became excited. He thought that he would never have the chance to see her again. Bai Mu thought of something and immediately took out his newly found information. He put it together and ran to borrow a yacht. If he didn't have a yacht, he would have to borrow one. In the afternoon, Gun Nanli had to deal with some matters, so Wei Wei Bai was free to do whatever she wanted. Wei Wei Bai carried her small suitcase filled with gold, silver, jewelry, and cash. She generously asked Gun Nanli's driver to send her to the port. When Gun Nanli was lying in the hospital, she often ran around when she was out to handle business. Everyone was used to it, and the driver didn't ask further. When they arrived at the port, the driver said, "Miss Bai, don't you need bodyguards to follow you?" Wei Wei Bai said, "You can follow me. Just get a small boat and follow me. I'm going to have to talk to someone about the contract. If you see me in danger, call my boyfriend." Of course, she was referring to Gun Nanli. His words naturally made everyone feel at ease and unsuspicious. The driver nodded. Wei Wei Bai carried the suitcase and walked towards the yacht at the harbor. The driver also made a call, as usual, and reported Wei Wei Bai's whereabouts. Soon, Gun Nanli would know where Wei Wei Bai had gone. Gun Nanli happened to be in a meeting. He owed CCE a favor, and in return, he would kill CCE's elder brother. Therefore, all the preparation information at hand was the information of the Atlanta family and CCE's elder brother. He listened to Wei Wei Bai's whereabouts and felt a little strange. "You said she went out to sea? Did she want to go out to sea for something recently?" Gun Nanli frowned and thought for a while, but he didn't find anything. A faint sense of foreboding made him look up and order, "Call the driver and bodyguards over. I'll go pick her up." He personally went to pick up Wei Wei Bai. Once her whereabouts were even a little out of his control, he would feel uncomfortable. This was a kind of illness. He felt that ever since his nightmares were cured by Wei Wei Bai, he had a new illness. His new illness was that he couldn't lose Bai Weiwei. He couldn't imagine the world after losing her. // Chapter 1491. Gun Nanli suppressed this thought. They were happy and sweet now, so he should control his uneasiness. Wei Wei Bai boarded the yacht, holding the nearby sea map in her hands. Although the map was complicated, she still found the most suitable escape route with the help of the system's design. To play dead, she also exchanged for an underwater breathing device. It could keep breathing for 12 hours in the sea. It was a godly item. It only had 3 days of life. It was good to have a discount. Wei Wei Bai boarded the yacht and saw the pale-faced Bai Mu. He coughed softly. The gunshot wound had destroyed his health. He said, "Wei Wei, I'm very happy to see you again." Wei Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe. Why did she feel like this brother who was not related by blood was going to die? Bai Mu was indeed going to die. His body was in a very bad condition. Gu Nanli's gunshot had destroyed his health. If it was not for the medical treatment, he would probably be lying in a coffin now. Even now, Bai Mu knew that he did not have many years left. Therefore, he used all his time to investigate the exchange between Wei Wei Bai and Gu Nanli. He actually managed to find out something. Wei Wei Bai nodded and looked around. The railings were better for diving. She had to observe first. Bai Mu saw her walking around and was about to speak. Wei Wei Bai said, "Set sail." The yacht had a captain. Bai Mu ordered and the yacht set sail. Wei Wei Bai's bodyguards immediately followed behind with a small yacht. The system said, "I used 1 day of life to buy you a stormy weather setting." Wei Wei Bai was touched. "You're becoming more and more like a roundworm in my stomach." The system said, "Don't you have any other way to describe it?" It was not a compliment at all that it looked like a roundworm. Wei Wei Bai said, "You're becoming more and more like my precious baby." The system was so mushy. It was going to be disgusted to death by the host. He arrived at the bottom of the sea where the system had specified that it would be very difficult to save people. Wei Wei Bai leaned against the railing and looked at Bai Mu calmly. "If you have something to say it quickly." Bai Mu was excited when he saw her. Although he felt that her actions were a little strange, he let her be. He took a step forward, his eyes filled with infatuation. "Wei Wei, we are not biological siblings." Wei Wei Bai listened to the system notification that Gu Nanli had arrived at the pier. She did not care about what Bai Mu said at all. She was biding her time. The system said, "The male lead is on board." Wei Wei Bai waited patiently. Bai Mu held the information and began to explain in detail. "After you guys were swapped, Gu Nanli's life in the Gu family wasn't very good. You know that he has a bad and dark personality. He has been a sociopath with bad intentions since he was young. So when Gu Buddha rebelled, he was the most suspicious person to betray Gu Buddha." Wei Wei Bai did not pay much attention to Bai Mu's information. She listened attentively to the system's report. Although the system did not know why she wanted to know the male lead's detailed route, it still told her the truth. "He has entered the sea and is about to enter your line of sight. Countdown of 10 seconds until he enters your line of sight." Wei Wei Bai began to prepare. A layer of tears began to appear at her eyes. Bai Mu was stunned. He could not help but reach out to wipe her tears. "Wei Wei Bai, are you angry that Gu Nanli killed your parents?" The system said, "The male lead has entered your line of sight." Entering their line of sight meant that they could see each other. Slash. Chapter 1492. You can search Transmigration System, Adonis, come over to Sashu, Com and Baidu to find the. Wei Wei Bai looked at the ship that was even bigger than Bai Mu's yacht. She knew that Gu Nanli could see her. Almost in an instant, her expression changed. Her eyes turned red and filled with tears of despair. She suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it at Bai Mu, screaming, "Don't come over!" Bai Mu was stunned for 2 seconds. That heart-wrenching scream scared him. Those who didn't know might think that he had done something to molest her. Even though he wanted to, he didn't have the strength. The system was extremely calm. It started taking out orange juice and a small stool, acting like an honest bystander. "Oh, look, that drama queen is here again." Bai Mu was frightened by Wei Wei Bai's pitiful appearance. He approached her carefully. "Wei Wei, what's wrong with you? Could it be that you can't accept your own background?" After all, Bai Qi was still really nice to her. Bai Wei Wei watched as the big ship got closer and closer. She said bluntly, "Tongzi, the weather's setting." Supermarkets were good. As long as one wasn't picky about the discounted goods, they could buy some godly stuff. Of course, many discounted goods would only be discounted once in their lifetime. Even until now, the substitute sticker had not been discounted a second time. She was really forced to become a super experienced driver. The system pulled out the weather setting, and the weather changed immediately. The wind was strong, the waves were dark, the sky was dark, and the clouds were dense. The weather at sea was always changeable, and today was a cloudy day. When it started to drizzle, no one paid much attention. Wei Wei Bai saw the opportunity and reached out to grab Bai Mu's arm, pushing him away violently. Don't come over. I won't believe anything you say. Bai Mu waved the information in his hands. It's all true. Wei Wei, Gunanli really killed your biological parents. He's an evil wolf. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled as she pointed the gun at Bai Mu. The despair in her eyes was heart-wrenching. You're the one who made up stories to frame him. I don't believe it. What's swapping identities? He killed my parents? Bai Mu was also excited. His attention was attracted by Wei Wei Bai, so he didn't pay much attention to the large ship that appeared. He immediately pulled out one of the pages. It's a paternity test. You can do it again if you want. When Wei Wei Bai saw the information in his hand, her pupils shrank. She could barely hold the gun in her hand. You're lying. I don't believe you, she muttered pitifully. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Even Bai Mu couldn't bear to see him like this. Suddenly, he saw the gun in Wei Wei Bai's hand tremble. She turned her wrist and aimed it at him. Bai Mu's expression changed drastically, and he immediately reached out to grab the spear. Wei Wei Bai held the gun tightly. From afar, the two of them looked like they were fighting, and they had reached an extremely dangerous point. On the other side of the large ship, the wind blew past Gunanli's incomparably cold face. He reached out to grab the gun of the sniper beside him and aimed it at the two people who were fighting on the yacht. Although he couldn't hear anything, but Wei Wei Bai's expression, that terrified and desperate look, made Gunanli think that Bai Mu wanted to kill her. No, she wasn't someone who was so afraid of death. Maybe Bai Mu had something on her and was threatening her. That was why she was so desperate. Gunanli's hand trembled a little. He took a deep breath and realized that he was actually very nervous. He calmed down and saw that Bai Mu had already snatched her gun away. His gaze turned ferocious. His finger was on the trigger, and the scope was aimed at Bai Mu. His technique was very stable. He just needed to kill Bai Mu with one shot. // crossover system. Adonis, come over here. Chapter 1493. Wei Wei Bai will be saved. He saw that the two of them were separated, and this was the best opportunity to shoot. If Bai Mu pointed the gun at Wei Wei Bai, then everything would be passive. Gunanli didn't hesitate and pulled the trigger. This was an action that was almost impossible to miss. Wei Wei Bai calmly heard the system's words. The bullet is coming, move back a little. Wei Wei Bai didn't listen. Instead, she saw the opportunity and slammed into Bai Mu, as if she wanted to snatch the gun in his hand. But the bullet happened to hit her abdomen. The system was shocked and immediately said without thinking, "Life subsistence guarantee activated." The subsistence guarantee could block the pain and ensure her safety to the greatest extent. This plane was very special. Even if she died, she couldn't leave. If Gunanli didn't die, then Wei Wei Bai's soul would be bound to him even if she died. Wei Wei Bai definitely wouldn't like it if it became a supernatural world. She was most afraid of ghosts. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little blank. She glanced at the wound on her abdomen. Blood gushed out and dyed her clothes red. Bai Mu's fingers trembled, and he almost shouted, "Wei Wei Bai." There was no gun and no misfire, so where did the bullet come from? Bai Mu stared at her blankly. She staggered a few steps and then looked at the big ship. Seeing Gunanli on the deck, his expression seemed to freeze, and his eyes revealed a kind of despair and shock. It was almost impossible to miss a bullet, but he had actually missed. Gunanli's mind was blank. His vision suddenly turned black and white. Black waves hit the deck, and the cold sea water soaked everyone's ankles. But Gunanli didn't seem to feel the cold. He suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, "Quick, get on the ship!" And the rain became heavier. Under the violent rain, the two ships collided. Wei Wei Bai couldn't take it anymore. Her lips trembled, and her body couldn't help but fall forward. As for Gunanli, he ran forward like a madman. There was still some distance between the two boats, and he could not reach Wei Wei Bai with his outstretched hand. His muscles were trembling uncontrollably, and even his teeth were chattering. Wei Wei, hold my hand. I'll pull you over here." Wei Wei Bai leaned softly against the railing of the yacht and looked at Gunanli. Her blood-stained appearance was very weak, but her eyes were terrifyingly bright, as if the flames of life were burning in her eyes for the last time. Gu Nanli wanted to jump over the railing, but a huge wave suddenly rushed over. In the storm, the rocking of the ship made it impossible for him to change ships immediately. Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed as she struggled to reach out her hand. Gu Nanli stretched out half of her body, desperately trying to grab her hand. Just as his fingertips touched her pale and cold fingers, she suddenly said, "I'm Gu Buddha's daughter." If this was normal, Gu Nanli would be able to perfectly disguise himself when his mind was still calm. He would tell her that she was thinking too much. How could she be Gu Buddha's daughter? All lies were commonplace for him. But at this moment, his mind was buzzing, and only fear appeared in his blank mind. She knew. She knew that they were swapped children. Did she know more than that? Wei Wei Bai saw his frozen expression, and her eyes completely dimmed. Is your liking me also a conspiracy? Because I swapped your identity, got everything you have, and lived happily. So you came back to take revenge on me? To TXD. Chapter 1494. Gu Nanli trembled as he said, "No, I didn't want to take revenge on you." Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. Her face was pale under the rain. "But you hated me from the start." Gu Nanli had already grabbed her hand. He stared at her hand, wanted to pull her over. "No, I've never hated you." Wei Wei Bai sighed. "I heard that you're not doing well, but I'm so happy." Gu Nanli realized that her wound was bleeding even more because of the rain. He didn't dare to take the risk and pulled her over. One of his legs was already over the railing. He wanted to go over and bring her back. He stared at her, his pupils constricting. "No, my life is also very good. Don't you see that I'm very good now?" Wei Wei Bai's voice weakened. Back then, were you the one who instigated Gu Buddha to die? This was the information that had been unlocked. Even Bai Mu couldn't find it. The system had just transmitted it to her. Gu Nanli had completely given up on the idea of gaining kinship and began to think of ways to kill Gu Buddha's entire family. He was too young and didn't have the ability to attack. Even if he used poison, it would be a stupid method. He couldn't get away with it. So, he used the most terrifying method to keep hinting at Gu Buddha. At that time, he had the perfect talent for being a charlatan. He taught himself a lot of psychology and hypnotism. He began to use all kinds of methods to repeatedly evoke the most terrifying thing in Gu Buddha's heart when he wasn't paying attention. Gu Nanli was a criminal genius. He stood in the shadows. She watched as Gu Buddha started to become suspicious. He kept deepening his guilt, fear, and all sorts of negative emotions. Gu Nanli kept hinting that as long as he killed Bai Qi, he would be saved. Then, Gu Buddha suddenly betrayed him. It was almost an impulsive crime. So, after he killed Bai Qi's wife, he was caught and killed by Bai Qi. Gu Nanli was already prepared. When the plan started, he escaped from the Gu family and didn't become a sacrifice. So, back then, Gu Buddha and Bai Qi were both injured and killed. The culprit behind all this was actually the inconspicuous Gu Nanli. After Wei Wei Bai read the information, she only had one feeling. This guy was too scary. How was this guy a husky? He was simply a vicious criminal with a high IQ. If he suddenly became interested in a few serial murder cases, no one would be able to trace it back to him for the rest of his life. Or perhaps, one day, he would get tired of having a wife, and it would be too easy for him to murder his wife. If she were to live with such a pervert, would she have to be on guard for the rest of her life? When Gu Nanli heard her question, his entire body turned cold. It was as if the temperature of his blood had left his body. Back then, no one knew about such a secretive matter. It was impossible for her to know that this was a test. He planned Gu Buddha's betrayal all by himself. Back then, Gu Buddha, his wife, and the rest of the Gu family were all killed by Bai Qi. And Bai Qi also lost his most beloved wife. Everyone who died was part of his plan. He was the one who pushed it. That was the first time he planned to kill someone. In the end, so many people died, and he completed the plan. But he didn't let his hands be stained with blood, and no one found out that he was the mastermind. At that time, he had already started to show the shadow of the venomous schemer. It was also at that time that he started to have nightmares and insomnia. Chapter 1495. In the dream, Gubuda was strangling his neck and kept saying why he didn't die. He didn't tell anyone the second half of the sentence. In the nightmare, the second half of Gubuda's line was, "The one who died was you, the murderer." He had always been the murderer. Gu Nanli's expression became gentle. Wei Wei, who are you listening to these irrelevant words? How can you be Gubuda's daughter? Bai Mu wants to drive a wedge between us. Would you rather believe the enemy than me? His expression was so gentle, affectionate, and sorrowful. There was a kind of seductive purity on his youthful face. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, as if she was convinced by him. Gu Nanli gently touched her cold fingers and adjusted the rhythm of his voice to make people trust him. Let's go home. You're injured, so we'll go for treatment immediately. The flames in Wei Wei Bai's eyes were finally extinguished. Clear tears came out her eyes. Her expression, however, was indifferent and even cold. You did everything back then. You came back this time to take my life. You came back to take revenge on us from the beginning. His childhood misfortune caused him to hate everything. The negative 50 favorability was actually not all targeted at Wei Wei Bai. It was the Bai family. Everyone in the Gu family was the target of his hatred. Before he was sure whether he was Bai Qi's child, he had already put everyone on trial. His heart had long been twisted. He wanted to drag everyone to hell and let everyone die to atone for his abuse of childhood. Wei Wei Bai was just one of the targets of his revenge. Gu Nanli's lips trembled, but he still smiled. Wei Wei, I'll come and get you. Don't think too much. Yes, he was here for revenge. But she saved him and let him know what happiness was. She pulled him back from the dark hell. So he couldn't lose her, not even the slightest possibility. He could make up for it. He could continue to perfect this lie and dispel her doubts. No matter who told her, no matter what evidence they had. He had the ability to make her believe that he was a victim and not a murderer. He was the best at lying. So don't leave him. The waves became even more turbulent, and the two ships were actually separated by the force of the waves. Gu Nanli immediately grabbed her hand. His men were already boarding the other party's ship. Soon, she would return to his side. The bullet was not fatal, and there was enough time to bring her back safely. Gu Nanli suppressed his panic and was about to say something. Bai Wei Wei suddenly exerted force, pulling one finger at a time from his hand. Gu Nanli looked up at her in disbelief. His reddened eyes made him look like a child who had been hurt. As long as he didn't put on an extremely gloomy expression, he always had a trace of youthfulness. It made people think that he was innocent and pitiful. He used to hate this appearance of his the most, which was why he used his hair to cover most of his eyes. But now, he wished that he could evoke even the slightest bit of pity from her. Wei Wei Bai's voice was weak and calm. So, I took away your childhood, and you took away my biological parents and adoptive mother. We're even. After saying that, she shook off his hand fiercely. A huge wave suddenly surged, and the ship tilted violently. Wei Wei Bai looked at Gu Nanli calmly and indifferently. Her eyes were so dim that they were broken. If I could, I would have never met you. Gu Nanli, I hate you. The huge wave hit, and she was thrown out of the ship. Slash. Chapter 1496. In the towering waves, Gu Nanli watched as Wei Wei Bai disappeared into the endless dark sea. Gu Nanli's hands were drenched by the seawater, leaving behind wet stains. He seemed to have suddenly sobered up and was about to jump over the railing. He could bring her back safely in the water last time, and he could do it this time too. But before he could do it, several subordinates rushed over and roared, "Mr. Gu, you can't go down. There are undercurrents below, and the storm is coming. You'll definitely die if you go down." No one could escape from the power of the undercurrents. Anyone who went down would die. The boat began to tilt. If they didn't leave now, they would capsize and die here. Gu Nanli's actions were even more ferocious. He single-handedly restrained a subordinate who was trying to stop him, took out a handgun, and placed it on the man's head. He fired without hesitation. Blood splattered all over his face. He threw the corpse away and looked coldly at those who dared to stop him like a demon. Even men who were used to bloodshed were so scared that their legs turned to jelly at this moment. The blood on Gu Nanli's face was washed away by the storm, revealing a face that was so pale that it was almost transparent. It was as exquisite as a jade sculpture. But this exquisiteness was unusually horrifying because of the murderous aura. After intimidating everyone at the first moment, Gu Nanli threw away the gun without hesitation. In a violent storm, in the violent waves, he stepped over the railing and quickly jumped into the sea. Bai Mu also staggered out. He held the gun in his hand and grabbed the railing as if he wanted to jump out. But suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He covered his chest that had been shot and squatted down. Bai Mu thought of Wei Wei Bai's appearance just now. He trembled as he looked at the documents soaked in seawater. Was it his fault? If he hadn't told her, she wouldn't have been so agitated. She wouldn't have been shot, and she wouldn't have died. Jumping into the sea with a wound. In this kind of weather, in this kind of sea, it was impossible to be saved. Bai Mu smiled tragically and picked up Wei Wei Bai's gun to his throat. If it wasn't for him, Wei Wei Bai wouldn't have died. I'd better go and apologize to her first. He pulled the trigger, and the bullet went through his throat. Blood splattered on the ground and was washed away by the sea. That day was everyone's nightmare. After Wei Wei Bai died, Gu Nanli also jumped into the sea. Almost immediately, Cici mobilized all the forces of both of them to seal off the sea on a large scale. Then he risked his life and began the difficult salvage. Fortunately, the storm came and went quickly. They finally caught Gu Nanli when the storm subsided. He was already delirious, but he continued to dive down to search for that impossible figure. It was also because of Gu Nanli's terrifying perseverance and exceptional luck. Only then did Cici manage to catch him. In such a vast sea, even if many ships were dispatched, it would still be a matter of luck to scoop up a person. And Wei Wei Bai obviously didn't have such luck. When Gu Nanli was pulled onto the boat, his whole body trembled and he struggled to open his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked extremely terrifying. He grabbed Cici's clothes tightly. Where is she? Have you found Wei Wei? Cici couldn't bear to see him like this. His heart was in a mess. Gu Nanli didn't look as calm and rational as usual. He asked sternly, Have you found her? Cici didn't dare lie to him. He said helplessly, No, Gu. Gu Nanli pushed Cici away and jumped into the sea without thinking. Although the storm was over, the sea was so complicated that it was lucky to be able to find Gu Nanli. If Gu Nanli jumped down again, he could only hold a funeral for him. Cici steeled his heart and raised his hand to hit him hard on the neck. Gu Nanli swayed a little, but she didn't faint. But Cici didn't give him any chance. A few people immediately rushed over. Together with the tall and strong Cici, they pinned down Gu Nanli, who was about to faint. Gu Nanli's eyes were red as he roared, Let go of me, Cici Atlanta, let go of me. Cici's face showed a pained expression, but his hand was steady as he pushed a tranquilizer into his arm. I'm sorry, but I can't lose you, brother. Wei Wei Bai definitely wouldn't survive, and he couldn't let Gu Nanli die with her. Gu Nanli gripped Cici's hand so hard that it was bleeding. He was like a vicious wolf, staring at Cici with unspeakable hatred. Cici felt goosebumps on his back as he watched him. But in the end, Gu Nanli couldn't resist the drug and slowly closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Cici looked at him worriedly. If he lost Wei Wei Bai, what would he do in the future? Was it true that first love didn't have a good ending? Chapter 1497. In a hospital somewhere far away, the system was still roaring. Do you think I'm omnipotent? What would happen if I really died? Jumping down, while injured in that kind of weather, could kill anyone at any time. Even the life support system was not omnipotent. If it had not used 30 of its health points to buy a protective cushion, Wei Wei Bai would have been sucked into the whirlpool and died. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the travel brochure and said calmly, I'm doing this for Gu Nanli's sake. If I really did die, he would be able to find the next one in peace. I've already said that I hate him. He would be upset whenever he thinks of me. He would not think about me anymore. In a hospital somewhere far away, the system was still roaring. Do you think I'm omnipotent? What would happen if I really died? Jumping down while injured in that kind of weather could kill anyone at any time. Even a life support system was not omnipotent. If it had not used 30 of its health points to buy a protective cushion, Wei Wei Bai would have been sucked into the whirlpool and died. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the travel brochure and said calmly, "I'm doing this for Gu Nanli's sake. If I really did die, he would be able to find the next one in peace. I've already said that I hate him. He would be upset whenever he thinks of me. He would not think about me anymore." The system said, "But you can't really go looking for death." Using this method to torture Gu Nanli was even scarier than the devil. Wei Wei Bai actually thought that this was for Gu Nanli's sake. Gu Nanli would be considered strong if he did not commit suicide. Because of this, Wei Wei Bai said casually, "Don't I have you? With you here, I can be at ease." The system was speechless. Then it blushed. Being praised by its host, it was actually a little shy. What was going on? Wei Wei Bai laid on the hospital bed, calmly planning where it would end after its injury was healed. After the strategy was completed, the feeling of getting rid of the person being conquered was wonderful. Every time he saw Gu Nanli, he would think of work and strategies. It was too tiring. She might as well end this once and for all and let Gu Nanli think that she was dead. Then they could part on good terms. Wei Wei Bai touched the box by the bed. It contained her belongings. Now, she was also a rich woman. She sighed. Life was really beautiful. Beautiful men, beautiful scenery, and delicious food were all calling out to her. She touched the wound on her stomach and decided to leave this place after she was done recuperating. Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes. "Tongzi, I haven't felt so relaxed in a long time." Mission complete, Gu Nanli was free from his job. The rest of the time was hers. There was no impatience to leave and no sense of urgency in the face of death. She had been running and finally had some time to rest in this plane. The system was silent for a long time before saying, "Go to sleep. I'll watch over you." Wei Wei Bai nodded in relief. "Remember to keep a close eye on the box." This was all money. The system's face was filled with sadness. When it heard the host's words, it stiffened. Could she not give a moment to properly grieve? She only thought about money. When did she also think about whether it had finished its snacks? Thinking about snacks, the system took out the orange juice mixed with water and drank it slowly. If it finished the orange juice, there would be nothing left to eat. The system was sad again. Suddenly, it saw the cup in its hand. When it bought this cup, it was a limited edition. Could it sell some life points? Then the system turned around and looked at the cups and plates that it had neglected. Oh, it accidentally found a small source of income. Even a little stool under its but could be sold. The tranquil surface of the sea was disrupted by a bunch of patrol boats. CCE helplessly hugged his head and squatted by the side. He kept persuading, "It's been a month, Gu. Even the corpses have been eaten by the fish. Give up." The man sitting in front of him slowly turned around. There was no trace of life in his eyes. Even his pupils were a little lax. Everyone could see that something was wrong with him, but they did not dare to persuade him. After all, Gu Nanli's current state was no different from that of a lunatic. Only CCE still had some dignity. He was not crushed by Gu Nanli. CCE shut up after being glared at by Gu Nanli. He could only squat obediently. The system said, "But you can't really court death." And using this method to torture Gu Nanli was scarier than the devil. Wei Wei Bai actually thought that this was for Gu Nanli's good. Gu Nanli was strong enough to not be tortured to suicide by her. Wei Wei Bai casually said, "Don't I have you? With you here, I can be at ease." The system was speechless. Then it blushed. It was actually a little shy after being praised by the host. What was going on? Wei Wei Bai laid on the hospital bed. She was peacefully planning where she would end up after her injury was healed. After the strategy was completed, the feeling of being left behind by the conqueror was wonderful. Every time she saw Gu Nanli, she would think about her work and the strategy. It was too tiring. She might as well just end it all and let Gu Nanli think that she was dead. Then, they could just part on good terms. Wei Wei Bai touched the box by the bed. It contained her belongings. Now, she was also a little rich woman. // / Chapter 1498. Gunamli continued to look at the sea. His expression was frozen, and his eyes were strangely empty. He seemed to be waiting for a result, or he seemed to be waiting for death. Everyone knew that Wei Wei Bai was definitely dead. It was common for people who died at sea to not be found. It was a mistake to fish for corpses here. After all, corpses would flow with the undercurrent to the sea tens of thousands of miles away. Perhaps they were bitten by fish, or perhaps they were washed to the bottom of the sea by something and did not float up. There were all kinds of possibilities, but the possibility of being found was basically zero. Gunamli did not care and tried his best to fish for corpses. He did not have any of his usual cleverness. Cici did not dare to stop him. That day he brought him back, but he woke up in less than half a day. He rushed out almost crazily, as if he would shoot anyone who stopped him. It could scare everyone to death. Cici had never seen Gunamli like this. He had lost his mind to the extreme. He was no different from a lunatic. Moreover, that kind of despair that reached his bones was simply unbearable to look at. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be his last hope, and this hope was shattered, and it even carried hatred for him. Even the wound on her abdomen before she died was accidentally caused by Gunamli. How could Gunamli live on? Therefore, Cici stopped him and told him that there was still hope. After all, there was still a golden 3-day rescue period for earthquakes. Wei Wei Bai might be able to live. At that time, he was only comforting him. After all, an earthquake was completely different from a sea. Moreover, Wei Wei Bai was injured. It was not like she was a god if she could live. However, Gunamli actually believed him. Then, he spent the entire month searching for Wei Wei Bai. 3 days had passed. No, 30 days had passed. Gunamli still did not give up. It was simply too scary. Cici vaguely knew that he had been convulsing for a long time. Gunamli actually knew that Wei Wei Bai was dead, but he didn't care and still came to find her, all for the sake of saving himself. It was as if he really admitted that Wei Wei Bai was dead, and Gunamli couldn't live either. Cici was so frightened by this thought that he was in a daze and broke out in a cold sweat. Another day came to an end with no results. The person who came to report the progress was drenched in cold sweat and stuttered. After all, who could fish out a dead person who had been swept away by the waves a month ago? Wasn't this a joke? However, because it was Gunamli, everyone had no choice but to play along with this big shot. He played until he trembled in fear, suffering unspeakably. When Gunamli heard the result, he didn't say anything. He just looked at the sea in silence. Suddenly, he walked forward as if he was about to step over the railing and fall into the sea. Cici was frightened and immediately rushed forward, grabbing his arm tightly. He was worried that he would take things too hard and fall Wei Wei Bai. "Gu, we didn't find anything today. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll definitely find her." Cici didn't dare to let go and said in a trembling voice. Gunamli stared blankly at the sea and suddenly said, "She's in a lot of pain." Cici's mouth twitched, but he still tried to comfort him. "We'll find her, and she won't be in pain anymore." Gunamli slowly turned to look at him, but his eyes were not focused at all. His face was so gray that there was no trace of color. He was so weak that he could disappear at any time. His body was not good to begin with. With this torment, Cici was worried that he wouldn't live long in the future. Gunamli suddenly said with a hoarse voice, "I had a nightmare. I dreamt that she was covered in blood. She said that she hated me and didn't want to see me. She asked me not to look for her for the rest of my life." /save button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 1499. Cici knew that nightmares were a special experience for Gunamli. When others had nightmares, they would be fine for a while. However, Gunamli's nightmares were like paranoia. Once he was entangled with nightmares, the terrible insomnia would appear. His childhood nightmares had been cured by Wei Wei Bai. In the future, who would he find to treat Wei Wei Bai's nightmares of death? Cici had a splitting headache. This month had been tormenting him to the point of exhaustion. He steeled his heart and said, "Gu, the dead can't be brought back to life. Don't torture yourself. No matter how sad it is, you have to endure it. Haven't you endured it for so many years?" Everyone knew that Gun Nanli had a vicious heart and was a scheming person. However, Cici knew that he still had some humanity. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been tormented by nightmares for so many years. Wei Wei Bai's arrival had brought out the best side of Gun Nanli. However, after she left, Gun Nanli seemed to have lost his soul. He was doomed at any moment. Gun Nanli wanted to break free from his hand. His eyes stared blankly at the sea. She should hate me. I've never had good intentions towards her. From the beginning to the end, he had approached her with ill intentions, because she had taken away his childhood and made him live in hell from the moment he was born. He had never been treated with true warmth. Therefore, in his heart, Wei Wei Bai was a person that he was jealous of and disgusted with. The more miserable his life was, the more malicious he felt towards her. Gun Nanli muttered to himself, "She should hate me. I'm a piece of trash, a rat in the swamp. The mistake in the beginning caused us to be wrong from the beginning to the end. I shouldn't have approached her and let her fall into this dark swamp like me. He didn't deserve her. It was right for her to hate him." The more he looked at Gun Nanli, the more he felt that something was wrong. Cici suddenly said, "I think there's something fishy about this matter. I wanted to tell you after you calm down, but you won't be able to calm down for a while." Gun Nanli continued to stare at the sea as if he hadn't heard him. Cici had a strange feeling that if he let go, Gun Nanli would immediately jump into the sea to commit suicide. He could only try his best to keep Gun Nanli alive. "Your house has been burgled." Gun Nanli did not care about the theft at all. He had lost the most important person to him. Even if he lost his entire business, it didn't matter to him. Wei Wei Bai was wrong. The most important thing to him was not his career, but her. Cici saw that he could no longer hold him back and immediately roared. The things that were stolen were all her things, and it was a large theft case. All of them were jewelry and cash. Her clothes were not touched, but I can still see that about 2 sets of clothes were stolen. Something flashed through Gun Nanli's muddled mind. He suddenly looked at Cici in a daze, and his eyes lit up strangely. The things that were stolen were all her things. Cici saw that there was hope and immediately said, "Yes." And the strange thing was that they were all in the room. All the expensive and small things he gave her are gone. It's more like she took them than they were stolen. Gun Nanli suddenly asked coldly, "What about the skincare products?" Cici was confused. Skincare products? Who would care if the skincare products were missing, except for the owner who needed them? Gun Nanli suddenly felt in Cici's pocket and took out his phone to call back. He asked the housekeeper, besides the expensive things that were stolen from Wei Wei's room, what else was stolen? The housekeeper did not dare to take anything and immediately answered in detail: clothes, 5 bottles of nail polish, and a tube of used red lipstick. The forward slash. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.